The Hogwarts Express hissed gently as it slowed into the station, signaling the start of another year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It was the beginning of their 4th year, and the air already buzzed with rumors about the Triwizard Tournament. Draco Malfoy stepped off the train with his usual swagger, flanked by Crabbe and Goyle, tossing his white blonde hair back as he scanned the crowd for familiar faces and potential targets. Meanwhile, Luna Lovegood stood off to the side near the edge of the platform, humming to herself while wearing radish earrings and reading a magazine upside down. Her father had insisted it was the best way to absorb the hidden meanings in the Quibbler. Most students gave her a wide berth. Draco didn't notice her at first. Why would he? She wasn't part of his world. But Luna noticed him. "Your aura's looking foggy," she said to no one in particular, but just loud enough as Draco passed. He turned, blinked at her like she'd spoken Murmish, and sneered. "Excuse me?" "Never mind. It might just be the pollen," she replied airily, then turned another page. Draco scoffed and moved on, but for some reason, the odd little comment stuck with him. Back at Hogwarts, the buzz surrounding the Triwizard Tournament drowned out most daily concerns. Lessons resumed, but with an undercurrent of excitement. Draco was too busy boasting about his father's connections at the Ministry and theorizing who might enter the tournament to think of Luna again, until the first herbology lesson. To his dismay, Professor Sprout had reorganized groupings for practical work. When he arrived at the greenhouse, his name was already next to Luna Lovegood's on the parchment posted by the door. "You've got to be kidding," Draco muttered under his breath. Crabbe and Goyle snorted behind him. Luna was already inside, hands buried elbow-deep in a pot of Snargaluff sap, her dreamy expression unbothered by the noxious smell. "You're late," she said calmly when he approached. The Snargaluff didn't wait, though. Draco curled his lip. "I don't talk to weirdos." "That's all right," Luna said brightly, wiping sap on her robe. "I talk enough for 2. He rolled his eyes and prepared to suffer through the next hour. But something strange happened. Luna wasn't just spacey, she was oddly insightful. She corrected him once when he mistook a thorn vine for a feeder root, and she did it without a trace of arrogance. She simply pointed and said, "That one stings, that one feeds." Easy to confuse, I suppose. Draco didn't thank her. But he didn't argue either. As weeks passed, they remained unlikely partners. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was usually sarcastic. Luna simply existed beside him like a quiet spell, soothing, strange, and unshakably confident in a way he didn't understand. One rainy afternoon, they stayed late in the greenhouse to repot Dittany. Luna, brushing soil off her fingers, suddenly asked, "Do you believe people can change?" Draco blinked. "What? I mean become someone different. Not overnight, but slowly. Like how Dittany starts as just a green sprig but becomes something powerful enough to heal wounds." He stared at her, unsure why it made him uncomfortable. "That's a stupid comparison." "Maybe," she said dreamily. "Or maybe it's just a seed of a thought." That night, Draco couldn't sleep. Her words played over in his mind. It wasn't the question that haunted him. It was that she'd asked him. As if she believed the answer mattered coming from him. He began noticing her more. In the library, bent over ancient runes. In the corridor, talking kindly to a ghost. In the great hall, offering pumpkin pasties to a first-year who'd dropped theirs. She never demanded attention. She simply lived like the world was more magical than anyone else could see. For the first time, Draco found himself watching someone without judgment, or at least less of it. The Yule Ball was announced in December, and the castle transformed into a winter palace of silver and frost. Talk of dates overtook even tournament gossip. Draco planned to ask Pansy Parkinson, mostly out of expectation. But on the day he was going to, he caught sight of Luna walking through the courtyard, her hands full of paper snowflakes that folded themselves midair. He didn't say anything, just watched, like a boy who'd stumbled upon a secret too delicate to touch. At the ball, he went with Pansy, of course. Luna arrived with a Ravenclaw boy named Michael, wearing a set of silver robes that shimmered like moonlight. She looked ethereal, like she had stepped out of a dream, and for one brief moment, when their eyes met across the hall, Draco felt something stir. It wasn't love. Not yet, but it was something. A spark. A pause. An idea. He turned away too quickly, scowling at himself, but the sensation lingered long after the music began. Winter melted slowly into spring, and with it came the steady hum of routine. Hogwarts was never truly quiet, but the noise faded into the background for Draco, whose thoughts often drifted far from the usual Slytherin drama and expectations. It didn't make sense to him. Why her? Why did Luna Lovegood, the eccentric Ravenclaw girl with radish earrings and a belief in creatures that probably didn't exist, keep showing up in his mind like an echo he couldn't shake? They were still partners in herbology. A twist of fate. Draco was no longer fighting quite so hard. He claimed it was because she did most of the work, but the truth was harder to admit. He didn't mind being around her. There was something disarming about her calm, her gentle weirdness. She didn't judge him. She didn't expect him to be anything except what he was. And somehow, that made him want to be better. "Do you ever think about the Forbidden Forest?" she asked one afternoon, her voice light as they trimmed bubotuber plants under the spring sun. "What secrets it keeps?" Draco raised an eyebrow. "What kind of secrets?" "Oh, hidden paths, lost creatures, magic that remembers things long after people forget." He paused. "That's ridiculous." Luna just smiled. Most true things sound ridiculous at first. Draco didn't answer. He couldn't. Her words didn't just go in one ear and out the other. They stayed, looping around in the back of his head like a riddle waiting to be solved. A week later, he found himself standing near the edge of the forest during a walk back from care of magical creatures. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Maybe just the feeling she talked about. Something old and quiet, watching. He didn't see anything unusual, but the air felt different. Heavy with a kind of knowing. Back in the common room, Pansy snapped her fingers in front of his face. "Earth to Draco? You've been off all week." He frowned. "I'm fine." "No, you're weird. What's going on with you?" He didn't answer, and she stormed off in a huff. He barely noticed. Instead, he glanced toward the Ravenclaw table the next morning at breakfast, wondering if Luna remembered the forest conversation, or if that kind of thing was simply normal for her. To his surprise, she waved at him. Just a small, quick motion, like they were old friends. He pretended not to see it, but felt heat rise to his face anyway. That weekend, something even stranger happened. He found a note tucked inside his potions book. The handwriting was looping and odd, with little stars drawn in the margins. "Meet me by the lake after sundown. The moon is supposed to be especially talkative tonight. LL." Draco stared at it for a full minute before shoving it into his robe. He told himself he wouldn't go. It was beneath him. Stupid. Silly. But just after sunset, he found himself slipping out through the courtyard and heading toward the lake. Luna was there, of course, sitting on a rock near the water, her shoes off and her toes dipping into the chilly water like it was summer already. A jar of fireflies floated beside her, glowing softly. She didn't turn when he approached. "You came," she said, smiling faintly. "I shouldn't have." Draco sat stiffly on a nearby stone. "I don't even know why I'm here. Maybe you were curious. Or maybe you're lonelier than you let on." He bristled. "I'm not. Everyone is sometimes," she interrupted gently. "Even people who pretend they're not." He stared at her for a long moment. "You say the strangest things. And yet you keep listening." That shut him up. They sat in silence for a while, the lake catching the moonlight like liquid glass. After a time, Luna leaned back and looked at the sky. "I think the stars are just memories shining back at us," she murmured. Draco glanced at her sideways. "That's not in any textbook. It doesn't have to be true to be beautiful." He looked down at the water, unsure why his chest felt tight. "You ever think you're wasting your time with someone like me?" "No," she said simply. "I don't think time spent being kind is ever wasted." He couldn't speak after that. The next day at breakfast, she passed him a folded bit of parchment with no words. Just a small sketch of a thestral flying over the moon. He kept it. Didn't tell anyone. Tucked it into his journal like a secret. Draco Malfoy didn't know it yet, but something inside him had begun to shift. Not dramatically. Not like thunder and lightning. More like a change in the tide. Soft. Steady. Unstoppable. And somewhere quietly Luna Lovegood was smiling, because she could feel it too. It was nearing the end of their 4th year, and the castle had begun to warm with the promise of summer. The Triwizard Tournament had stirred a restless energy in every corner of Hogwarts. The final task loomed ahead like a distant storm, casting longer shadows in the halls. Yet in the middle of it all, between classes and whispered bets, something quieter, stranger, and far more significant was unfolding. Between a boy who wore too many masks and a girl who didn't wear any at all. Draco had started lingering near the greenhouse after class, sometimes pretending he forgot a quill, other times claiming he left behind a textbook. Luna never pointed it out, though he was sure she noticed. She always noticed. One afternoon, while repotting Mimbulus Mimbletonia plants together, she said casually, "You don't have to pretend you like herbology, you know." "I never said I liked it. You keep showing up, though." Draco frowned. "Maybe I just enjoy the peace and quiet." Luna smiled. "And yet I talk so much." He scowled but didn't respond. Her words never came with sarcasm or bite, and he hated how they softened the edges of everything. He had grown up surrounded by sharp things, words that wounded, expectations that strangled. But Luna's world didn't follow those rules. He didn't understand it, but he wanted to. Their conversations grew less awkward over time. He learned she had a secret spot behind the greenhouse where Puffskeins gathered in the mornings. She learned he actually read more than he let on. Books on magical theory, wand lore, even some of the older, darker texts buried in the restricted section. Not because he believed them, because he wanted to understand how people believed them. He asked her once, "Why are you like this?" "Like what?" she asked, plucking dandelions and twirling them between her fingers. "Like, you don't care what people think." She tilted her head. "I care. I just don't let it change me." That answer sat with him for days. One rainy evening, he sat in the Slytherin common room surrounded by students bragging about who they'd hexed in the halls and which professor they could outsmart. He stared at the flames in the fireplace and thought of Luna sitting in the Ravenclaw Tower, probably reading Upside Down again or whispering to the moon. The next morning, he skipped breakfast and found her by the lake. "Do you ever feel like you're not really you when you're around everyone else?" he asked suddenly. Luna looked at him, her eyes wide and soft, and nodded. "Sometimes. But I try to stay anchored." "To what?" She touched her chest gently. "To the part of me that still believes in things. Even when it hurts." He looked away, throat tight. "That sounds exhausting." "It is," she said quietly. "But it's worth it." For the first time, Draco realized how much strength it took to be Luna Lovegood. It was a strange thing. He didn't feel lighter when he was around her. He felt heavier, as if she handed him pieces of himself he didn't know were missing. And yet he kept coming back. They started writing notes during class, hidden in books and passed in the hallway. Silly things mostly. Doodles of magical creatures, comments about professors, odd facts Luna thought he'd appreciate. He never responded with drawings, but he underlined things she'd written. A circle here. A star there. His quiet way of saying "I'm listening." Luna never pushed for more. One Saturday in May, Luna asked if he wanted to go with her to the Ollery. "I'm sending something to my father," she explained. "He's doing a piece on the magical properties of nargles in seasonal weather changes." Draco didn't even ask what a nargle was. He just said, "All right." They walked together in silence, but not an uncomfortable one. The kind that felt like shared breathing. When they reached the top of the Ollery, Luna knelt beside a snowy owl, cooing softly as she tied her letter. Draco stood beside her, unsure what to do with his hands. Luna glanced at him. "You know, people always expect you to be angry." He looked down. "Because I usually am. But not now." "No," he admitted. "Not now." She nodded and stepped closer, just enough for their shoulders to brush. "I like you better like this." He didn't move. Couldn't. Later, as they walked back, Draco said, "You confuse me." "That's all right," she said. "You confuse you too." That night, Draco sat alone in the common room with her latest note folded in his palm. It was a small drawing of a dragon sleeping under a tree. On the back she'd written, "Even dragons can rest, you know." He didn't sleep for a long time. He just stared out the window, watching the moonlight drift over the black lake, wondering when he had started seeing the world through her eyes, and why he never wanted to stop. By the time their 5th year began, something had quietly shifted between Draco and Luna. Something invisible to everyone else but undeniable to the two of them. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was a gravity, a pull, like they were each orbiting the same quiet star and didn't realize it until their paths began curving inward. The train ride back to Hogwarts was loud and familiar. Draco sat in the Slytherin compartment with Blaise and Theo, who were arguing about who'd win in a duel, Crumb or a hippogriff. Draco watched the scenery blur past the window, feeling oddly detached from it all. At the next lull in conversation, he stood up. "Where are you going?" Blaise asked, eyebrow raised. "Stretching my legs," Draco muttered. He didn't know what he was doing until he found himself standing outside a Ravenclaw compartment. Luna was sitting alone, her legs folded beneath her, spectrospecs pushed up into her hair, reading the Quibbler upside down. "You don't knock," she asked without looking up. "You saw me coming? You always show up eventually." Draco rolled his eyes and slipped inside, closing the door. "You're not even surprised." "Why would I be? We've been drifting toward each other for months." "I'm not drifting." She looked at him with that maddening calm. "Of course you are." They didn't speak for a while. He leaned back against the seat, arms crossed. Luna returned to her magazine, humming under her breath. "I don't even know what we are," Draco finally said. "We're people," she replied. "And people don't always fit into neat categories." "That's deeply unhelpful." She smiled. "But true." The rest of the ride passed in an easy quiet, and when they parted at the station, Luna touched his sleeve gently. "I'm glad you're here." Draco didn't answer, but he held her gaze for just a moment longer than necessary. That year, everything at Hogwarts felt heavier. The threat of war buzzed under every conversation, though most students didn't speak it aloud. The Ministry was interfering more and more. Umbridge's arrival turned the castle colder, coated in rules and cruel smiles. Luna didn't change. If anything, she became more herself. She joined Dumbledore's army without hesitation, her spells strange but oddly effective. Draco watched from the sidelines, too tangled in his father's expectations and Slytherin's unwritten rules to follow her openly. But he watched. He watched when she stood beside Harry in the room of requirement. He watched when she spoke up during lessons, even when Umbridge tried to belittle her. He watched the way she walked the halls like the world hadn't cracked beneath their feet. One evening, he found her alone in the astronomy tower. She was leaning over the stone edge, eyes lifted to the stars. "You shouldn't be out past curfew," he said, stepping up beside her. "Neither should you." "I was looking for," he trailed off. "For me?" she asked, smiling without looking. "Maybe." They stood side by side under the wide, quiet sky. "You know, they're watching everything now," Draco said quietly. "Snape. Umbridge. The Ministry. You're not safe." "No one is," she replied, voice gentle. "But I won't stop being who I am." He turned to her, something fierce rising in his chest. "You'll get hurt." She finally looked at him. "So will you?" He didn't know what to say to that. "I worry about you," he admitted, more to the night air than to her. You keep going like none of it touches you." "It touches me," she said softly. "But I choose not to carry it all." He leaned on the edge of the railing, staring down at the dark grounds. "I wish I could be like you." "No, you don't," she whispered. "You wish you could be you, without everything they told you to be." Draco's chest ached. He had no retort. Before he left, she handed him something, a folded scrap of parchment with a pressed flower inside. "What's this?" "Something that won't last. But it matters anyway." He kept it. Of course he did. Over the next few weeks, they spoke more in passing, small smiles in the corridor, hidden notes left behind statues, brief moments in the library where their hands brushed over the same book. No one seemed to notice. Or if they did, they pretended not to. Draco began to laugh more. Just a little. He insulted less. Walked a little slower. Thought a little longer before speaking. Pansy noticed and asked if something was wrong. "Nothing's wrong," Draco said. "Maybe something's finally right." And though he would never admit it out loud, it was Luna's voice that echoed in his mind at night, not his father's. It wasn't perfect. He still snapped at people. Still played the role Slytherin demanded. But sometimes, when he was alone, he imagined what it would be like to walk across the great hall and sit beside her without shame. That moment hadn't come yet. But maybe one day. For now, the space between them was filled with possibility. And neither of them was afraid of falling. The 5th year unfolded like a slow-burning secret. While Umbridge's cruel grip tightened around the school and fear seeped into every classroom, Draco found himself slipping away from the boy he'd always been, without entirely understanding who he was becoming. His friendship with Luna wasn't something he spoke about. Not to his housemates, not to the few people he might have called friends, and certainly not to his parents when they sent their carefully worded letters every other week. But it was becoming the most real thing in his life. He knew where she would be without having to ask. Feeding the Thestrals in the Forbidden Forest before breakfast, reading under the giant willow tree near the lake at lunch, walking barefoot in the astronomy tower when the moon was full. He started showing up. Not always beside her, not always close enough to draw suspicion, but near. Present. And that seemed to be enough for her. The Room of Requirement had become a refuge for many. Dumbledore's army trained in secret there, and though Draco wasn't part of it, he knew about it. Everyone did eventually. Luna never bragged, but she never hid it either. She spoke of it once, after a quiet evening of stargazing. "I like feeling useful," she said. "I know people still think I'm strange. But when I cast a shield charm that actually works or help Neville with his aim, it matters." Draco had watched her, the silver light making her look more ghost than girl, and said nothing. He couldn't tell her he admired her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He was still a Malfoy. His inner world became a battlefield. During the day, he said all the right things to the wrong people, mocked Dumbledore, parroted ministry propaganda, rolled his eyes at talk of resistance. But at night, he sat alone in the Slytherin common room and reread the little scraps Luna gave him. Drawings. Phrases. One time she'd simply written, "You're allowed to want something else." He'd folded that one so many times the parchment was close to falling apart. One afternoon in March, everything changed. Luna was ambushed outside the greenhouses by a pair of Umbridge's inquisitorial squad members. They cornered her, laughed about Nargles, and confiscated the issue of the Quibbler she'd been carrying. When she refused to hand it over, they jinxed her shoes to glue to the ground and vanished her wand. Draco had been walking back from care of magical creatures when he saw the scene. He should have turned around. Every part of him screamed to walk away. He didn't. He stormed over, wand raised, voice sharp. "Finite!" The jinx vanished. Luna wobbled slightly but didn't fall. The two boys looked up, startled. "Malfoy," one of them said, laughing. "You lost or something?" "I said leave her alone," Draco growled. They hesitated. He was a Malfoy. His family had power, weight, names that meant things. That still counted for something. The boys muttered and backed off, snickering as they went. Luna looked at him with a mixture of surprise and something softer, something unreadable. "Thank you," she said, brushing dirt off her robes. "Don't mention it." "I won't," she promised. They walked in silence for a bit. He returned her wand without comment. When they reached the edge of the courtyard, she said, "You keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Resisting quietly." Draco looked away. "It's not enough. It doesn't have to be loud to matter." That night, he received a howler from his father. Somehow, word of the altercation had reached Lucius, and the fire in his voice left Draco's ears ringing for an hour. But for once, Draco didn't feel ashamed. He felt defiant. Luna passed him a note during potions the next day. It was just a drawing of a lion curled up beside a snake. No words. None were needed. By spring, they had created their own language. Glances across the great hall, tapped fingers on library desks, brief touches in the hallways when no one was looking. Once, after a particularly difficult day, Luna had reached for his hand under the table and simply held it. Draco had gripped her fingers like a lifeline. He never talked about it, never asked what they were or what they were becoming. But sometimes, late at night, he would trace the shape of her name on his parchment, over and over, until his ink ran dry. When the DA was discovered and students began disappearing for questioning, Draco panicked. He couldn't protect her from the system he was still part of. He found her in the Ollery again, sending a letter to her father. "They're coming for you," he said, his voice hoarse. "You need to stop." She tied the parchment calmly, then turned to him. "I know. Then why?" "Because hiding isn't the same as surviving." "I don't want to lose you," he admitted. "You won't," she said softly. "Not really. Promise me." She stepped forward and took his hand, placing something small in his palm. It was a tiny charm, shaped like a star carved from wood. "I promise," she whispered. "Whenever you look up, I'll be there." He clenched it tight, memorized the curve of her smile. And for the first time, Draco Malfoy realized just how much he could lose, and how much he was willing to fight for it. The days that followed the discovery of Dumbledore's army unfolded like a slow-motion fall. Students whispered more than they laughed, and the corridors grew colder despite the arrival of spring. Suspicion seeped into every glance, and Draco felt it like a weight pressing on his spine. He saw less of Luna. She had been one of the few who hadn't been caught, but the inquisitorial squad had doubled their patrols. Umbridge began watching Luna more closely, perhaps sensing that she was more dangerous than her dreamy smiles let on. Draco didn't dare approach her during meals or classes anymore, but their eyes would still meet in passing, a flicker of gold and gray, quiet and unbroken. One evening, hidden deep in the Slytherin common room, Draco sat staring at a crumpled piece of parchment. It was from Luna. A riddle, as always. What has no mouth but speaks, no tongue but moves your heart? He didn't need to think long. Silence, he wrote back. The next morning, tucked into his potions book, he found a second note. That's where I'll be tonight. That night, well past curfew, Draco moved through the castle like a shadow. The astronomy tower was off limits now, patrolled too often. But there was another place, an old corridor near the north wing, where the tapestries hadn't been dusted in years and the portraits tended to snore through the night. She was already there when he arrived. Sitting cross-legged on the cold stone floor, her wand casting a soft glow around them. "You came," she said. "You said silence. I thought it was a trick." "It was," she grinned. "But you understood it anyway." He sank down beside her, his back against the wall. For a moment they didn't speak. The world outside this hidden corridor felt distant, like something they'd both stepped away from entirely. "I keep waiting for someone to pull you into all this," he said quietly. "I'm already in it," she replied. "Just not the way they expect." "You're not afraid?" "I am," she said honestly. "But I think being brave just means loving something enough to keep going anyway." He looked at her profile in the dim light, the soft curls falling into her face, the quiet strength she wore like moonlight. "And what do you love?" "I love magic. I love truth. I love the idea that people can change." She turned to him, her voice a whisper. "I love seeing the good in people, even when they don't see it themselves." Draco's throat went dry. His heart ached with the strange pressure of words he couldn't speak. Instead, he reached for her hand. It was cool and steady, and she didn't flinch when he entwined their fingers. "They'll never understand this," he said. "They don't need to." He wanted to say more. That every time he saw her, it felt like the world stopped spinning for just a second. That he'd memorized her laugh. That he no longer felt safe hiding behind the name Malfoy. But none of that made it past his lips. Instead, they sat there, side by side, as the silence spoke everything else. The next few weeks were a blur of tension. Dumbledore vanished from the castle. Umbridge took full control. The school buzzed with fear. Fred and George's grand escape shook the walls and lit something wild in the students. The idea that the system wasn't invincible. Luna's smile had never looked more dangerous than it did that day. After the fireworks exploded through the corridors, she met Draco in the old corridor again. This time, she brought a bag of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and offered them like they were rare treasures. He laughed. Really laughed. "I think this one's earwax," he said, grimacing. "Then you're lucky," she replied with a wink. "I got dragon breath." They sat, knees touching, trading beans and stories they'd never tell anyone else. He told her about his first accidental magic, the time he'd frozen an entire rose garden out of panic. She told him about how she once tried to hex a blibbering humdinger, but turned her father's boots into pudding instead. It wasn't just affection that grew between them anymore. It was comfort. It was the knowing. It was the safety of being seen. Then came the moment everything fractured. Harry had a vision. Serious. The Department of Mysteries. The rush of decisions, the wild scramble into action. Luna was chosen, trusted by Harry to come along. Draco only found out after she was gone. When he heard she'd left the castle, his chest went tight. No one told him the details. No one noticed his absence from the common room that night. He sat instead in the corridor where they always met, the last note she'd given him clenched in his fist. He stayed until morning. She returned with bruises on her arms and a cut near her temple. But she returned. Draco didn't rush to her. He didn't need to. She found him later that day by the lake. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am now," she said. He wanted to tell her he'd imagined her falling, broken, gone. He wanted to scream about how reckless it had been, how terrified he was. But she was standing in front of him, whole. And so instead, he kissed her. It wasn't planned. It wasn't grand. It was soft and scared and grateful. It was 1,000 unspoken things folded into one fragile moment. When they broke apart, Luna simply smiled. "I was wondering when you'd find the courage." Draco, for once, had nothing to say. The days at Hogwarts seemed to grow heavier with each passing week. Tensions between the students were mounting. Whispers of the Ministry's tightening control and Voldemort's growing power filling the air. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, Draco couldn't help but be drawn to Luna. She was his calm in the storm, her peculiar nature and her unwavering optimism like a quiet refuge in a castle that was slowly becoming a battlefield. It was clear now that something had shifted between them, something neither of them had expected when they first crossed paths. Their moments together, brief as they were, had grown more meaningful. Draco no longer saw her as just the quirky, dreamy girl from Ravenclaw. He saw her as someone who could change his life, someone who had already begun to. Luna, for her part, seemed unbothered by the external pressures. She didn't care about the whispers of the other students or the looming shadows of danger. What mattered to her was the connection she had with Draco, a quiet understanding that no one else could see. She had always believed in the beauty of strange things, and now, she was starting to believe in the strange possibility of them. It was on one of these nights, under the veil of twilight, just before curfew, that Draco found Luna by the lake. She was sitting on the grass, her legs crossed beneath her, staring up at the sky as if it held the answers to all the questions she never asked. Draco approached cautiously, unsure of what to say. He had always been guarded, always been the one to hide behind a mask. But with Luna, that mask seemed unnecessary. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting down beside her. Luna didn't turn to him immediately, as if contemplating whether to answer. "The stars," she said finally. "They remind me that there's always something bigger than what we can see. That there's always a way out, even when things feel impossible." Draco chuckled softly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not sure I believe in escape anymore." Luna turned to him then, her eyes soft but piercing. "Sometimes, escape isn't about running away. Sometimes, it's about finding a different way to be." Her words lingered in the air between them, a quiet promise that he didn't fully understand but somehow felt the weight of. He wasn't sure where it was leading, but he knew one thing: his feelings for her were undeniable. He couldn't escape them, no matter how hard he tried. As the moon rose higher in the sky, they sat in silence, the world around them seemingly forgotten. For the first time in weeks, Draco allowed himself to just be. With Luna beside him, the weight of his choices didn't seem so overwhelming. It was as if, in this moment, they had carved out their own little corner of peace in a world that was growing more fractured by the day. The days at Hogwarts passed in a blur of tension and unrest. Every corner of the school felt charged with the looming presence of Voldemort's rise to power, and students were becoming increasingly aware of the role they might have to play in the war that was approaching fast. Draco couldn't shake the feeling that his every move was being watched, that every word he spoke was a reminder of the choice he had yet to make, between the life he had always known and the unknown path Luna was offering him. Luna, for all her light-hearted nature, wasn't oblivious to the darker currents running through the school. She saw the changes in Draco, the subtle shift in the way he held himself, the internal conflict that was slowly consuming him. Yet she never pushed him. She let him come to her when he was ready, knowing that their connection, however fragile it seemed, was growing stronger with every quiet moment they shared. That evening, they found themselves in the Forbidden Forest, far from the watchful eyes of the school. Luna had invited him to come, to escape the ever-present shadows of fear and suspicion that had begun to creep into their lives. The forest, dark and mysterious, was a place they had both come to appreciate, its ancient trees offering a sense of comfort and solitude. "I've always liked it here," Luna said, her voice soft as she walked beside Draco. There's something about the way the trees shelter us, the way the forest listens. Draco glanced at her, unsure of what to say. It felt like the forest, too, was listening to them, as if it understood the weight of the world they carried. "You're right," he replied after a moment, his voice quiet, but filled with a sense of truth. "It feels safer here." The darkness of the forest seemed to have an odd way of grounding him, of making him feel less like a puppet caught in the strings of his family's expectations, and more like someone who had the ability to choose his own destiny. And in that moment, with Luna by his side, he wasn't Draco Malfoy, the son of Lucius Malfoy and heir to the Dark Lord's service. He was just Draco, a boy who had found something worth protecting. Luna turned to him, her expression serious for the first time in a while. "I can feel it, Draco," she said, her voice steady. "I can feel the way you're pulling away from all of this. You don't have to do it alone." He met her gaze, his heart racing. It wasn't that he didn't want to be with her. He did more than anything. But the pull of his family, of his duty, was a force unlike anything he had ever experienced. "I'm not sure how to escape all of this, Luna," he admitted, his voice raw with the weight of his confession. "You don't have to escape," she replied softly, stepping closer. "You just have to choose what matters most. And I think you already know what that is." For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade into the background. The rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, it all became irrelevant. All that mattered was the space between them, the unspoken words hanging in the air. Draco could feel the truth of her words resonating deep inside him. But the fear, the uncertainty, still gripped him tightly. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to make that choice." "You are," Luna said, her voice unwavering. "You're stronger than you realize, Draco. And you don't have to do it alone. I'm here." The reassurance in her words, the warmth in her touch, made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For the first time in ages, he allowed himself to believe that there might be a way out of the darkness. The wind rustled through the trees as they stood in the heart of the forbidden forest. Two souls caught between two worlds, unsure of what the future held, but willing to face it together. The weeks following their time in the forbidden forest passed in a strange haze. The whispers around Hogwarts had grown louder, more insistent. Umbridge's presence seemed to suffocate the very air in the castle, and it felt like the walls were closing in on everyone. Draco could feel the tension in every hallway, every classroom. His footsteps had become heavier, weighed down by the conflicting loyalties that tore at him from every direction. But then there was Luna. She had become his quiet rebellion, the one thing in his life that made sense. They didn't speak about it constantly, their connection, the way it had evolved, but it was there unspoken in every glance, every touch. They had carved out their own space in the madness, and for the first time in Draco's life, he found that it was enough. One evening, Draco found himself in the library, attempting to focus on his studies, but failing miserably. His mind kept drifting to Luna, her words echoing in his mind. "You don't have to escape. You just have to choose what matters most." What mattered most? His family? The Dark Lord? Or something entirely different? The heavy footsteps of someone approaching drew him from his thoughts. He looked up to see Luna, her eyes bright as always but with a quiet urgency in them. Without a word, she sat down across from him, her presence like a breath of fresh air in the stifling silence of the library. "Draco," she said softly, her voice laced with concern. "There's something happening. I can feel it." He leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Luna hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I don't know all the details, but I've been hearing things. There's talk of a meeting, a gathering of those who are opposing the Dark Lord. I think they're planning something." Draco's heart skipped a beat. "A meeting? Who's involved?" "I don't know," Luna replied, her voice steady despite the uncertainty in her words. "But I think you need to be careful. There are forces at play that none of us fully understand yet." Draco ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. A part of him felt the pull to remain loyal to his family, to do as he was told. But the other part of him, the part that had been growing ever since he met Luna, wanted to believe that there was another way. A better way. "Luna," he said quietly, "I don't know if I can walk away from everything I've known. My family, they won't understand. And the Dark Lord," he trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Luna reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. You don't have to do it alone, Draco. Whatever happens, I'll be here. And I believe in you. Her words sent a surge of warmth through him, and for the first time in ages, he felt something that had been absent from his life for too long. Hope. It was fragile, fleeting, but it was there. I don't know what to do, he whispered, his voice almost lost in the quiet of the library. You'll figure it out, Luna said, her voice filled with certainty. You always do. Just don't let fear be the thing that decides for you. They sat there for a long while, the weight of their conversation hanging between them like a fragile thread, one that could snap at any moment or hold them together through the storm that was coming. The days grew colder as the year wore on, and the shadows in Hogwarts seemed to stretch farther than ever before. The war was no longer a distant, abstract concept. It was real, it was here, and it was changing everything. Draco could feel the pressure of it closing in around him, each day making the choice more urgent. His father's letters had become more frequent, more demanding, pushing him toward a path he could no longer ignore. But the weight of those letters felt different now, heavier than it had ever been. Luna's words, "You don't have to do it alone," echoed in his mind, but it didn't seem to matter. How could he escape the destiny that had already been written for him? Luna had noticed the change in him. She always did. She could read him like an open book, and the silence between them had grown longer, filled with an unspoken understanding that neither one of them wanted to acknowledge. Draco was torn, and he was beginning to feel the full force of that conflict in every corner of his life. One evening, after another long day spent in a haze of fear and confusion, Draco found himself wandering the halls, seeking something, anything, to clear his mind. His footsteps echoed through the empty corridors as he passed by familiar doorways, his heart heavy with the weight of his decisions. It was then that he saw her, Luna, standing alone by one of the grand windows, looking out over the grounds. The pale light of the moon washed over her, making her seem almost ethereal. For a moment, Draco hesitated. He wasn't sure what he could say to her. He wasn't sure what he even wanted to say. But the pull to be near her, to feel her presence beside him, was undeniable. "Luna," he called softly, his voice barely more than a whisper in the silence. She turned toward him, her face softening when she saw him. "Draco," she replied, her tone filled with quiet warmth. "I was waiting for you." Draco's heart gave a strange, painful lurch in his chest. "Waiting for me?" Luna nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "I knew you'd come. I knew you'd need to talk." For a moment, Draco felt the weight of everything pressing down on him. The war, his family, the path he was being forced onto. But then there was Luna, as steady and calm as ever. He found it hard to believe that she could still be so unwavering, so certain when everything around them was falling apart. "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't know how to get out of this." Luna stepped closer to him, her gaze gentle but firm. "You don't have to know everything, Draco. You just have to know what you believe in, what you want to fight for." He shook his head, frustration building in him. "What if I can't have both? What if I lose everything by choosing the wrong side?" "You're not choosing between good and evil," Luna said, her voice steady. "You're choosing who you want to be. And sometimes that's harder than anything else." Draco looked down at his feet, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. He had always defined himself by his family, by the legacy that had been thrust upon him from birth. But what Luna was offering was different. It wasn't just an escape from his family's expectations. It was a chance to find out who he was outside of all of that. "I don't know if I can do it," he whispered. "You don't have to do it alone," Luna repeated, her voice like a gentle promise. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his. The simple touch sent a shock through him, a reminder of everything he had been afraid to face. But in that moment, standing beside her, he felt something shift. For the first time, he wasn't just Draco Malfoy, the heir to a legacy of darkness. He was Draco, a person with choices, with the power to shape his own future. The sound of approaching footsteps broke their quiet moment, and Draco stepped back, his heart still racing. He knew that what was coming, what was already happening, was inevitable. The world was closing in, and soon, he would be forced to choose. But in that fleeting moment with Luna, he felt something that gave him strength. Hope. "I'll figure this out," he said, his voice quieter now, but with a sense of determination. "I promise you, Luna, I will." Luna smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. I know you will, Draco. You've always had it in you. And with that, they stood together in the silence of the night, two souls bound by the weight of choices yet to be made, but comforted by the knowledge that they didn't have to face them alone. The next few days were filled with a strange sense of unease. It was as though the air itself had thickened, the pressure of the impending storm hanging over everyone at Hogwarts. Draco could feel it in the way the students moved through the halls, the way they whispered behind closed doors. The Dark Lord's influence was tightening around them all, and the weight of his family's expectations weighed heavily on Draco's shoulders. The letters from his father had grown increasingly insistent, each one more demanding than the last. The choice was becoming clearer, but that didn't make it any easier. Yet, through all of this, Luna remained as constant. She had a way of making the chaos around them seem less threatening, of reminding him that there was something more to life than the battle lines that were being drawn. It was during one of their late-night conversations in the library that he realized just how much he had come to rely on her. He found himself leaning on her in ways he hadn't expected, sharing thoughts and fears he'd kept buried for years. I can't escape it, Luna, Draco confessed one evening, his voice strained as he stared down at his hands. It's too much. My family, the Dark Lord, they won't let me go. Luna's gaze was unwavering as she listened, her expression calm and understanding. It's not about escaping, Draco. It's about choosing what's worth fighting for. Draco looked up at her, his heart heavy with doubt. But I don't know what that is. I don't know if I can fight for anything. Luna smiled softly, her voice barely above a whisper. You're already fighting, Draco. Every time you question what's been handed to you, every time you choose to stand by what feels right, that's the fight. You're already in it. Her words were a lifeline, a thread of hope that seemed to cut through the darkness that threatened to consume him. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe that it was possible, that he could find a way to stand up for something, to make a choice that didn't condemn him to a future he didn't want. But as the days went on, that belief began to waver. His father's influence was too strong, and the pressure to conform to the role he was expected to play was overwhelming. He could feel the tug of his past, of the life that had been mapped out for him from birth, and it was becoming harder to ignore. It was one evening, as Draco was walking down a dimly lit corridor, that he overheard something that would change everything. He hadn't meant to listen in, but the conversation was too close to ignore. We need Malfoy, came the low voice of Crabbe. Malfoy's weak, a second voice, Goyle, responded, his tone dismissive. He'll come around when the time is right. He's just delaying the inevitable. Draco's stomach tightened as he moved closer, making sure they couldn't see him. His name, his future, was being discussed as if he wasn't even in control of it. They were right, he wasn't in control. The thought made his blood run cold. Do you think he's really going to betray his family? Crabbe asked, his voice filled with doubt. He'll have no choice, Goyle answered. The Dark Lord's given him an ultimatum. He's already in too deep. Draco's heart raced as the words sank in. He was trapped. There was no way out. His fate had already been decided for him, and no matter how much he wanted to choose a different path, it seemed that the choice had already been made. But Luna's words, "You're already fighting," kept echoing in his mind. Was this really the end? Was he really powerless to change anything? He needed to talk to her. He needed to hear her voice, to remind himself that there was still something worth fighting for. Later that evening, he found Luna by the lake, her silvery blonde hair shimmering in the moonlight. She was staring out across the water, lost in thought, as if waiting for him. Without a word, he walked over to her, his steps heavy with the weight of everything he had learned. You heard them, didn't you? Luna asked quietly, as if she already knew. Draco nodded, swallowing hard. I can't do this, Luna. I can't fight it. I'm not strong enough. Luna turned to face him, her expression serene but firm. Draco, strength doesn't come from refusing to face what's hard. It comes from choosing to face it anyway. Her words felt like a balm to his battered soul. She was right. Strength wasn't about avoiding the hard choices. It was about confronting them, even when it seemed impossible. I don't know what's going to happen, Draco said, his voice shaky. But I can't let them decide my fate for me. Luna reached out, placing a hand on his. You've already taken the first step, Draco. The rest will come when you're ready. Just don't lose yourself in the process. As he looked into her eyes, Draco felt something shift. The world around him was still uncertain, still filled with shadows, but Luna's unwavering belief in him gave him the strength to face whatever was coming. He wasn't alone in this fight, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to keep him going. With a deep breath, Draco made a promise to himself. He would find a way out of this, no matter what it took. The Dark Lord, his family, the war, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was who he chose to be. The air at Hogwarts had taken on a foreboding chill. The war, once a distant threat, was now an undeniable presence in their everyday lives. Tensions were high, and it seemed that every day brought more danger, more uncertainty. Draco could feel it pressing in on him, the sense that everything was about to change, and not in a way that would allow for a return to normalcy. The weight of the world had never felt heavier. But despite it all, he found himself seeking solace in Luna. There was something about her calm, unshakable presence that made everything feel just a little less overwhelming. When they were together, even for the briefest moments, Draco could almost forget about the growing darkness outside the walls of Hogwarts. He could almost believe that there was still hope, still something worth fighting for. It was during one of these stolen moments that Draco finally made a decision. He had spent so many nights turning over the choice in his mind, caught between the world he was born into and the world he wanted to build with Luna. The decision wasn't easy, it never had been, but in the quiet of the library, as he watched Luna read, he realized something profound. He couldn't allow himself to be defined by the past any longer. He had to carve his own path. "Luna," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her eyes shifted up from the book she was holding, meeting his gaze with her usual steady calm. "Yes, Draco?" she asked softly, sensing the gravity in his voice. "I've made up my mind," Draco said, his voice quiet but resolute. "I'm going to stand against the Dark Lord. I can't be part of this anymore. I won't be." Luna's gaze softened, and she set the book down, her hands folding together as she leaned slightly forward. "I'm proud of you, Draco. But you have to know, it won't be easy. There's no going back once you make this choice." Draco nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. "I know, but I can't live in fear anymore. I can't live for someone else's war, someone else's hatred. I want to make my own choices. I want to choose who I am." Luna reached out, gently touching his hand. "And I believe you can, Draco. But remember, this isn't just about you. There are others who will need to hear your choice, and some of them won't be as understanding." Draco let out a soft, bitter laugh. "That's an understatement. My family won't ever forgive me. But I can't do it anymore. I can't stay silent. I have to act." Luna smiled, a warmth spreading across her face. "Then you'll have to take a stand. And I'll be right there beside you." Her words, so simple and yet so powerful, gave Draco a surge of strength. He didn't know what the future held, or what kind of consequences his decision would bring. But in that moment, he realized that he wasn't alone in this. He had Luna by his side. For the first time in a long while, Draco felt like he had a reason to fight. The next few days were a blur of planning and quiet conversations. Draco met in secret with a few other students, those who were also looking to oppose the Dark Lord, who had become disillusioned with the power he sought to wield. It was a ragtag group, made up of students from all houses, some of them former members of Dumbledore's army, others new to the cause. It was dangerous work, meeting in the shadows and exchanging information, but it was the only way forward. As Draco took part in these clandestine meetings, he couldn't help but notice the change in the atmosphere at Hogwarts. It was as if the entire school was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The rumors of betrayal and rebellion spread like wildfire, and even the professors seemed on edge. It was only a matter of time before the storm broke. In one of their meetings, the group discussed how they would get word to the Order of the Phoenix. It was clear that the Dark Lord was growing stronger, and they needed to act quickly. "We need to move now before it's too late," one of the older students said, her face drawn with worry. "The longer we wait, the more people will get hurt." Draco knew she was right. The time for hesitation was over. He had already risked so much simply by associating with this group, and he knew that the consequences of his actions could be catastrophic. But there was no turning back now. He had made his choice, and he couldn't allow fear to stop him. The next night, Draco found himself standing with Luna by the lake once again. The moonlight reflected off the water, casting a soft glow over the two of them. It was the same lake they had stood by so many times before, but tonight felt different. The weight of their choices hung in the air, a quiet tension that neither of them could shake. "Are you sure about this?" Luna asked, her voice filled with concern but also understanding. "Once we go through with this, there's no going back." Draco looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm sure. I have to do this, Luna. I can't keep running." Luna smiled softly, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Then we'll do it together." In that moment, Draco knew that whatever happened next, he wouldn't be alone. Luna had stood by him through everything, through the fear, the confusion, the pain. And now, as they prepared to face the storm together, he realized just how much he needed her. She had been the anchor in the midst of the chaos, the one thing that had kept him grounded when everything else seemed to be slipping away. Together, they would face whatever came next. Together, they would fight. The days were growing darker at Hogwarts. Tension was palpable, the air thick with suspicion and fear. Draco had made his choice, and now there was no turning back. He was playing a dangerous game, and with every passing moment, the stakes only grew higher. The risk was enormous, but for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Hope that he could do the right thing. Hope that he could carve out a future that wasn't dictated by his family or the Dark Lord. But it was fragile, this hope, and Draco knew that one misstep could shatter it completely. Every meeting with the student group was more tense than the last. The plan was in motion, but it was far from foolproof. The risks they were taking were enormous. There were whispers that the Death Eaters were growing suspicious of certain students who were thought to be loyal to the Dark Lord. Draco's own role in the growing rebellion was one of the most dangerous, as his every move was being scrutinized by his parents, by Snape, by the Dark Lord's spies. The stress was beginning to show. Draco found it harder to focus, his thoughts constantly drifting to Luna and the future they were trying to build together. Every conversation with her felt like a moment of peace in the midst of the storm. She was his anchor, the one person who made him believe that the world could still be good, that love could still exist even in the darkest of times. But there were moments when he feared that even she would be swept away by the chaos that was slowly consuming everything. That night, the weight of his decision bore down on him more than ever before. The full moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the school grounds. Draco made his way to the lake, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He needed to clear his mind, to gather the strength to face whatever was coming next. And there, by the water, he found Luna, as calm and serene as always, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "You're here," she said, her voice soft, but there was a trace of worry in it. "I thought you might be late tonight." Draco nodded, swallowing hard as he approached her. "I had to think. There's so much happening so fast. I don't know if I'm ready for all of it." Luna didn't say anything right away. Instead, she took his hand in hers, offering him the silent comfort that only she could. Her warmth, the touch of her hand, seemed to push back the shadows that had crept into his thoughts. "It's all right to feel scared, Draco," Luna said after a long pause, her voice calm but resolute. "You're facing things that most people could never imagine. But you're not alone in this." Draco squeezed her hand, grateful for her words. "I don't know how to keep going sometimes. It feels like everything I do is just making things worse." Luna smiled faintly. "That's because the world is a complicated place. You can't always fix everything with a single choice. But the important thing is that you're trying. You're trying to make it right." Draco met her gaze, his heart heavy with the weight of everything he was carrying. "I don't want to lose you, Luna. I don't want to drag you into all of this. You deserve more than this chaos." Luna tilted her head, considering his words carefully. "I'm not going anywhere, Draco. I'm here because I choose to be. No one is forcing me. And you don't have to carry this alone." The sincerity in her voice hit Draco harder than he expected. It was true. Luna had never asked him to be anything other than himself. She had always been there for him, from the very beginning, in ways he never fully understood until now. It was something he hadn't known he needed, someone to hold on to when everything else seemed to slip away. "But what if we fail?" Draco asked, his voice thick with fear. "What if it's all for nothing? Luna didn't hesitate. Then we keep going. Because we're making the right choice, and that's all we can do. Her conviction was unwavering. In that moment, Draco felt a spark of determination light within him. He wasn't fighting for the past anymore. He wasn't fighting for a life that had been chosen for him. He was fighting for something that mattered, something that felt real. And he wasn't doing it alone. With Luna by his side, he had the strength to face whatever was to come. The sound of footsteps approaching broke their silence. Draco's heart raced, and Luna instinctively stepped closer to him, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The shadows felt deeper now, as if the world was closing in on them. A figure emerged from the darkness, Professor Snape. Malfoy. Snape's voice was low and menacing. You're out here alone at a time like this? Draco straightened, instinctively falling back into the role that Snape expected of him. I needed some air, Professor. I didn't mean to be out here for too long. Snape's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across his features. Be careful, Malfoy. The Dark Lord expects results. He is not patient. Draco's throat tightened. He could feel Luna's hand squeeze his, offering him silent strength. I understand, Professor, Draco replied, his voice betraying none of the turmoil he felt inside. Snape regarded him for a moment longer, his gaze flickering toward Luna. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared back into the night. As Draco exhaled, a heavy weight settled on his chest. He knew that the walls were closing in. The pressure was mounting. There was no more room for mistakes. If he was going to stand by his decision, he would need to be ready to face everything. His family, the Dark Lord, the consequences of defying everything he had ever known. But he wasn't alone anymore. Luna's quiet voice brought him back to the present. Whatever happens, Draco, we'll face it together. And for the first time in weeks, Draco believed it. The tension at Hogwarts had reached a fever pitch. It was as if the school itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable confrontation. Every hallway felt darker, every corner more ominous. Students walked in groups, their eyes darting around nervously as rumors of betrayal and impending danger circulated like wildfire. No one knew who could be trusted anymore. Everyone was on edge, knowing that the line between loyalty and treachery was thinner than ever. Draco found himself spending more and more time with Luna. She was his escape, his refuge from the chaos that threatened to consume everything. Their stolen moments together had become his anchor, the one place he could still feel like he was in control of his life. With her, he could forget about the ever-growing threat of the Dark Lord and the weight of his family's expectations. With her, he could simply breathe. But even as the world outside seemed to fall apart, Draco knew that time was running out. The stakes were getting higher, and the consequences of every action, every decision, felt heavier. He had made his choice. There was no going back now. But even with Luna by his side, the fear gnawed at him. What if they weren't strong enough? What if everything they were working toward was just a fleeting hope, doomed to fail? The full moon had risen again, casting an eerie glow over the grounds of Hogwarts. Draco and Luna met by the lake, as they often did when the weight of everything became too much. Tonight, however, the atmosphere felt different. There was a stillness in the air, a quiet before the storm. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Luna stood by the water, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. She was quiet, lost in her own thoughts, but Draco could see the subtle tension in her posture. She was as much a part of this rebellion as he was, and yet he couldn't help but worry about her safety. The deeper they delved into this dangerous world, the more he feared for her. He couldn't lose her, not like this. Luna, Draco called softly, his voice carrying across the stillness of the night. She turned to him, a soft smile tugging at her lips. Draco, you look troubled. I'm scared, he admitted, stepping closer to her. I don't know if we're ready for this. I don't know if we can really stop it. Stop him. Luna's expression softened, and she took a step toward him. It's okay to be scared, Draco. It means you care. But we have to do this, don't we? We can't just stand by and let everything fall apart. Draco met her gaze, and in her eyes, he saw the same determination he felt within himself. She wasn't just by his side because of some fleeting sense of duty. She was there because she believed, as he did, that this was the right thing to do. They were standing up to something far bigger than themselves, and it was a fight they couldn't afford to lose. "I can't do this without you, Luna," Draco said, his voice almost a whisper. "You're the reason I'm still fighting. You give me a reason to keep going." Luna's smile deepened, and she reached out, gently touching his cheek. "And you give me a reason, too. We're in this together, Draco. No matter what happens next." For a long moment, they simply stood there, taking comfort in each other's presence. The sounds of the night, rustling leaves, distant whispers of the wind, seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the two of them standing side by side, facing the uncertain future. But their peace was short-lived. A rustling sound broke the stillness, and before Draco could react, a shadow loomed over them. He spun around, his heart racing as a figure stepped into the moonlight. It was Snape. Draco's breath caught in his throat. Snape's presence was never a good sign, especially not now. He had already made it clear that he was watching Draco closely, waiting for any signs of disobedience. And if Snape knew that Draco was meeting with Luna, someone who was not only a part of the rebellion but someone Draco had grown close to, it wouldn't be long before the entire plan unraveled. "What are you doing out here, Draco?" Snape's voice was cold, laced with suspicion. "And with Miss Lovegood, no less. You're becoming far too reckless for your own good." Draco's pulse quickened, but he refused to show fear. He straightened, meeting Snape's gaze with as much confidence as he could muster. "We were just getting some fresh air, Professor. Is that a problem?" Snape's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing at first. His gaze flickered between Draco and Luna, and for a brief moment, Draco thought he saw something almost calculating in the way Snape observed them. "You should be careful, Malfoy," Snape finally said, his voice low and menacing. "People are watching, and you're starting to draw attention to yourself. The Dark Lord will not tolerate failure." Draco's heart pounded in his chest. He knew Snape was right. The walls were closing in. Every move they made, every conversation they had, could be their last. But he wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything he had sacrificed. "We're doing what's right," Draco said, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "And you can't stop us." Snape didn't respond immediately. He simply gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod. "We'll see, won't we?" With that, Snape turned and disappeared back into the shadows, leaving Draco and Luna standing in the moonlight, the weight of his words lingering between them. As the silence settled once more, Draco turned to Luna. She was watching him, her expression unreadable, but there was a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. She knew the risks, just as he did. And yet, she didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. They were in this together, and nothing could change that. "Are you okay?" Luna asked softly. Draco nodded, though the unease still gnawed at him. "Yeah, I will be. But I don't think it's going to be much longer before everything comes to a head." Luna smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "We'll be ready. We have to be." Together, they stood there, side by side, as the full weight of the coming storm loomed on the horizon. The days blurred into one another, each one more tense than the last. The weight of everything pressing down on Draco seemed unbearable. His every step felt calculated, every word chosen with precision, as if he were walking a razor-thin line between two worlds. On one side, the world he had always known, the world of his family, of duty, of the Dark Lord's will. On the other, the world he was trying to build with Luna, a world of rebellion, of hope, of doing the right thing no matter the cost. But as the days went on, the lines began to blur. The divide between those two worlds seemed to grow smaller, and Draco couldn't help but feel as if he were standing in the middle of a great chasm, with no way to bridge the gap. The pressure was becoming too much. Every day brought more danger, more uncertainty. The plan they had been working on for so long, breaking free from the Dark Lord's control, helping the Order, and saving those they loved, was beginning to feel like a distant dream, impossible to reach. Draco met Luna in their usual spot by the lake, his heart heavy with a burden he couldn't shake. He had seen too much, heard too much, and yet he couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. The truth that he wasn't sure if they could win this fight, that he wasn't sure if they would survive it. Luna was already waiting, her figure standing out against the moonlit sky. She turned as she heard him approach, a small smile forming on her lips. But it didn't reach her eyes. Draco could see the worry in her gaze, the same worry he had felt growing in his own chest. "Draco, you're late tonight," she said softly, as if she had been expecting him all along. There was a strange calmness to her voice, a stillness that only made the anxiety in Draco's chest more pronounced. "I had to think," Draco replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Things are complicated. I don't know what we're walking into." Luna didn't say anything at first, simply studying him with those intense, unblinking eyes of hers. "We're walking into something we can't undo, Draco. We've made our choice. We can't go back now." Draco closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of her words settling deep inside him. He had made a choice, yes. But the uncertainty of what that choice meant was starting to consume him. The plan was fragile. The risks were too great. What if they were all doing this for nothing? What if their efforts to defy the Dark Lord only made everything worse? What if they failed? "I'm scared, Luna," Draco admitted, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "I don't know if we can win this. I don't know if I'm strong enough to see it through." Luna stepped closer, her eyes softening. "You don't have to do this alone, Draco. You never have to be alone in this fight. We're in it together." Her words were simple, but they held a quiet strength that made Draco's heart ache. She believed in him. She believed in them. And that belief gave him something to hold on to. "I don't want to fail you," Draco whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to fail anyone." "You won't," Luna said firmly, taking his hand in hers. "We're doing this for the right reasons. We can't fail as long as we keep fighting for what's right." Draco looked at her, her face bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight. She was unwavering, her faith in him stronger than anything he had ever known. And for a moment, it felt like everything would be okay. Maybe they could actually make this work. Maybe they could defeat the Dark Lord. Maybe they could bring peace to the wizarding world. But just as quickly, doubt crept back into his mind. What if it wasn't enough? What if they were outmatched, outnumbered? The odds were stacked against them. The forces they were up against were powerful, ruthless, and Draco couldn't ignore the growing whispers that things were starting to slip out of control. "We're running out of time," Draco said, his voice low. "The Dark Lord is getting closer. He knows something's wrong. He's tightening his grip on the school." Luna squeezed his hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Then we fight back. We fight with everything we have." Her words were simple, but they carried an undeniable truth. They couldn't stop now. They couldn't give up. Not when so many depended on them. Not when the fate of their world was hanging in the balance. But just as they were about to speak again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps interrupted their moment of peace. Draco's heart leapt into his throat as he turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows. It was Snape again. "Malfoy." Snape's voice was cold, his presence like a weight pressing down on Draco's chest. "You're out here again with Lovegood, I see." Draco's pulse quickened. He could feel Luna's hand tighten in his, but he didn't let go. Snape's eyes flickered over them, and there was something almost predatory in the way he studied them. "I trust you're both not wasting time on foolishness," Snape continued, his tone dripping with disdain. "The Dark Lord will expect results, Draco. And if you think for a moment that you can continue with this ridiculous plan of yours without facing the consequences, you are sorely mistaken." Draco's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to remain calm. He couldn't afford to show any weakness. "Not now. We're doing what needs to be done, Professor," Draco said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "We're fighting for something better." Snape's eyes narrowed, his lip curling in a sneer. "A noble sentiment, Malfoy. But sentiment doesn't win battles. Power does. And the Dark Lord has more of that than any of us could ever hope to match." Luna's grip on Draco's hand tightened, but she remained silent, her gaze unwavering. She wasn't afraid of Snape. Neither of them were. "You'll see, Professor," Draco said, his voice low but firm. "We'll see who has the power when this is over." For a moment, Snape's eyes seemed to flash with something that Draco couldn't quite decipher. But then, with a final, cold glance, Snape turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving them alone once more. Draco let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "We're running out of time, Luna." Luna nodded, her eyes steady. "Then we make every moment count." The storm was coming, but Draco was ready. He wasn't going to back down now. Not with Luna by his side. The castle was quiet in the early hours of the morning, its stone walls holding the weight of secrets too heavy to bear. It was a stillness that never quite felt safe, like the calm before a thunderstorm that everyone knew was coming but no one wanted to face. Inside, students moved through the halls, casting furtive glances at one another, speaking in hushed tones, afraid that any word spoken too loudly could reach the wrong ears. For Draco, each day felt like a countdown. Every step he took, every glance exchanged, reminded him that time was running out. His conversations with Luna had grown more serious, more urgent, as they both realized how much was at stake. The danger was no longer just a whisper in the shadows. It was closing in on them, as inevitable as the dawn. He had never imagined that his life would come to this. Standing on the edge of something so much bigger than himself, torn between the dark world he had been raised in and the one he was trying to create with Luna. But there was no going back now. He had made his choice, and every day brought him closer to the moment when everything would change. Draco sat in the common room, a rare moment of solitude in the midst of the growing chaos. His thoughts were a storm of their own, each one tumbling over the next. It was hard to concentrate, hard to focus on anything but the looming threat that seemed to follow him wherever he went. It didn't help that Snape's words still echoed in his mind. The Dark Lord will expect results. He had tried to push the fear down, tried to remind himself that he had Luna with him, that they were doing this for something bigger than themselves. But as the days wore on, it was becoming harder to believe that they could win. The more they learned, the more they saw, the clearer it became that the forces they were up against were more powerful than they could have ever imagined. It was late when Luna found him, slipping quietly into the room as if she had materialized from the shadows. Her presence was always a comfort to him, a quiet reassurance that, for all the darkness that surrounded them, they weren't alone in this. "Draco," Luna said softly, her voice breaking through the fog of his thoughts. "You've been quiet. Too quiet." Draco didn't look up at first, lost in his own troubled thoughts. He could feel her eyes on him, always so perceptive, always understanding when something was off. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment, his voice barely above a whisper. "About everything. About how we're going to win this. I'm not sure we can." Luna moved closer, sitting beside him on the worn couch. Her warmth was like a beacon in the storm of doubt swirling inside him. "You've always been a fighter, Draco," she said, her voice steady, sure. "You've never backed down from anything in your life." "It's different now," Draco replied, finally meeting her gaze. "This isn't just about me. This is about all of us. And the stakes have never been higher. I can't help but think that we're all walking into something we won't be able to survive." Luna's eyes softened, her gaze filled with a quiet understanding. "I know it feels like that," she said, her voice low and soothing. "But you're not alone. We're not alone in this fight." Draco swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. "What if we don't make it, Luna? What if we lose?" "We won't," Luna replied firmly, her hand reaching out to grasp his. "We can't. Not when we have so much to fight for. Not when the world is depending on us." Draco closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words wash over him. There was something in her, something unwavering, something unshakable, that made him want to believe too. But the reality was that they were fighting a war they couldn't afford to lose, and there was no telling who would survive it. The sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor, pulling them both from their thoughts. Draco's heart skipped a beat. He had learned long ago to be cautious of any unexpected interruption, especially when it came to their secret meetings. He stood quickly, instinctively moving to the side of the room where the shadows were thickest. Luna's hand slipped from his as she followed his movements, her expression unreadable. They both held their breath as the door creaked open, revealing a figure that made Draco's stomach churn. It was Pansy Parkinson. "Well, well," Pansy said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What have we here? A little secret meeting, Draco? I didn't know you were so cozy with the likes of Lovegood." Draco's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He didn't need to. Pansy's presence was enough to send a cold shiver down his spine. She had always been an agent of chaos, a constant reminder of the world Draco had tried to escape. Pansy stepped fully into the room, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. "You think you're being so careful, don't you? But I see through you, Draco. You can't hide forever." Luna stepped forward, her gaze unflinching. "We're not hiding anything, Pansy," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We're not afraid of you." Pansy smirked, her gaze flicking between Draco and Luna. "I'm not the one you should be worried about," she said, her tone darkening. "The Dark Lord has eyes everywhere, Draco. And I'm sure he'd be very interested to know what you're up to with the likes of her." Draco felt his blood run cold at the mention of the Dark Lord, but he didn't let his fear show. He couldn't afford to. "You're wasting your time, Pansy," Draco said, his voice low but firm. "If you're here to threaten us, it's not going to work." Pansy's expression hardened, and for a moment, the tension in the room was palpable. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and left, the door slamming behind her. Draco let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was too close. Luna was silent for a moment before speaking. "You know she's not the real danger, right? She's just a pawn in a much bigger game." "I know," Draco said quietly. "But it's getting harder to tell who's on our side and who's just playing a part. I don't trust anyone anymore." Luna turned to face him, her eyes steady. "We can only trust each other, Draco. And we'll figure it out. Together." Draco nodded, feeling a flicker of hope rekindle deep inside him. Despite everything, despite all the uncertainty and the fear that gripped him, there was still a chance. They still had each other. And that was enough. The following weeks passed in a blur of meetings, whispers, and secret plans. Every moment felt more precarious than the last, as the shadow of the Dark Lord loomed ever closer. Draco's resolve was beginning to harden, but it was a hard-earned strength, born of uncertainty, fear, and the weight of the choices he had made. Luna remained a constant, a steady presence in the chaos. Her belief in their mission never wavered, her hope unbroken by the darkness that seemed to encroach on every corner of their world. In a way, it was her unwavering faith that kept him from crumbling under the pressure. Without her, Draco didn't know if he would be able to keep going. But things were changing. The signs were everywhere. Whispers of the Dark Lord's growing power. Strange disappearances. The unmistakable feeling that everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. There was an air of dread hanging over Hogwarts, thicker than ever before. It was the night before the full moon, and Draco found himself standing by the lake once more. The cool night air brushed against his face, and he could hear the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was a rare moment of peace amidst the brewing storm, but even that felt fleeting, like it too was on the verge of being swept away. Luna appeared beside him, as if she had simply materialized from the shadows, her silver hair glowing faintly in the moonlight. She smiled, a soft, reassuring smile that spoke of a confidence that he envied. "Do you ever wonder if this is all worth it?" Draco asked quietly, his eyes fixed on the rippling water. "I mean, what if we're just playing into their hands? What if the Dark Lord is right? What if we're just too weak to win?" Luna's gaze was steady as she met his eyes. "I've wondered the same thing," she admitted softly. "But I don't think we're weak, Draco. I think we're just the last hope we have. Maybe that's why we have to fight. Because if we don't, then who will?" Her words resonated deep within him. He hadn't thought of it that way before. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for everyone who couldn't fight for themselves. They were fighting for a world that still had a chance, even if it seemed like that chance was slipping away with each passing day. Draco turned his gaze back to the lake. The ripples on the water seemed to stretch endlessly, fading into the distance. "I just don't know how much longer we can keep this up," he murmured. "Everything feels like it's falling apart." "We'll hold it together," Luna said with quiet conviction. "We have to. There's no turning back now." The sound of footsteps behind them interrupted their moment of quiet contemplation. Draco's pulse quickened as he instinctively moved to shield Luna from whatever was coming. But it was just Harry, his face tired and drawn, a look of determination etched into his features. "Malfoy, Lovegood," Harry greeted them with a nod, though his eyes were weary. "You two look like you've seen better days." "Could say the same for you, Potter," Draco replied, though his words lacked the usual bite. The war had begun to change everyone, even the most steadfast of enemies. "We're meeting with the others," Harry said, his tone serious. "There's news. We need to discuss the next steps." Draco's stomach tightened. The moment had arrived. The talks, the plans, they were no longer a distant thought, a dream of what might be. They were real now, and the time to act was closing in. He turned to Luna, her eyes still calm, still unwavering. "I'll be there," Draco said, his voice steady, though the weight of what was coming pressed down on him like a physical force. The three of them made their way toward the room of requirement, the familiar halls of Hogwarts now seeming more like a maze. The corridors were empty, save for the occasional ghost or portrait that hung on the walls. The school felt deserted, the once vibrant halls now stifling, as if the life had been drained from them. When they reached the door of the room of requirement, Draco paused, his hand hovering just above the doorknob. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. They were about to enter a new phase in this war, one that would push them all to their limits. "Ready?" Harry asked, his voice soft but carrying a weight of its own. Draco glanced at Luna. She smiled at him, that serene expression never faltering. Her belief in him, in all of them, was something he hadn't fully understood until now. It was the one thing that kept him grounded when everything else seemed to be falling apart. "I'm ready," Draco replied, opening the door. The room was filled with the usual group: Hermione, Ron, Ginny, and the other members of the Order. But there was a palpable sense of unease in the room. They were all bracing themselves for what was to come. The stakes were higher than ever before. They were no longer just fighting for the future. They were fighting for survival. "Sit." Harry gestured to Draco and Luna, who took their places at the long table. "We've got news from the front. Things are moving faster than we expected. The Dark Lord's forces are preparing for something big." The conversation quickly turned to tactics, to strategy. They discussed what they knew of the Dark Lord's movements, what was being done to counteract them, and how to rally the forces of the resistance. But through it all, Draco couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. There was an undercurrent of uncertainty in the air, something that none of them were willing to voice. It was Hermione who finally said what they were all thinking. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice strained with the pressure of it all. "The longer we wait, the stronger he gets. We can't afford to wait for another opportunity." Draco felt a chill run down his spine. They were running out of time. Every day, every hour, it felt like they were teetering on the edge of disaster. And the worst part was that they didn't know how it was all going to end. Would they succeed? Would they fall? For the first time in weeks, Draco allowed himself to let the doubt in, to acknowledge the fear that had been building in him since they had started down this path. They were about to face the most dangerous battle of their lives, and they couldn't afford to lose. As the meeting continued, Draco's mind wandered. He kept thinking about Luna, about the strength she had given him, and how much he needed her now more than ever. Whatever happened, they would face it together. He would make sure of it. "Draco," Luna's voice broke through his thoughts. "We're ready, aren't we?" He looked at her, her eyes filled with quiet determination, and for the first time in a long while, Draco felt something he hadn't dared to hope for, a spark of hope. "We are," he said, his voice steady. "We'll make it through this." And for the first time, he believed it. The days leading up to their next move were tense, filled with the quiet hum of anticipation that seemed to pervade every corner of the castle. It was as though Hogwarts itself had become a battleground, with every student, every professor, every member of the Order on edge, waiting for the inevitable. Draco felt the weight of the situation more heavily than ever before, as if the very walls of the castle were pressing in on him. Luna's presence, as always, was his anchor, a steady force that kept him from spiraling into the depths of his fear. But even she couldn't deny the growing sense of danger that surrounded them. The whispers were louder now, the tension thicker. The Dark Lord's forces were on the move, and there was no denying that the battle they had all been dreading was almost upon them. It was late one evening when Draco found himself once again by the lake, the cool night air doing little to calm the storm raging inside him. He had been doing a lot of thinking, about everything that had brought him to this point, about the path that lay ahead. There was so much at stake, so much that could go wrong. "Draco," Luna's voice broke through the quiet, gentle but carrying an undeniable force. She appeared at his side as if she had been there all along, her silvery hair catching the moonlight. "You're thinking too much." Draco chuckled softly, though it was tinged with frustration. "It's hard not to think, Luna. There's too much happening. Too much that could go wrong." Luna smiled, a soft and reassuring expression that never seemed to falter, no matter the situation. "That's true," she agreed. "But sometimes thinking too much can cloud your judgment. Sometimes it's better to simply act." Draco turned to look at her, studying her face, trying to find any hint of fear or doubt. But there was none. She was as calm and composed as ever. It was both a comfort and a source of envy. How did she do it? How did she maintain her clarity of mind when the world was crumbling around them? I don't know how you do it, Draco said quietly, his voice low, almost lost in the night. How do you stay so calm when everything's falling apart? Luna tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. I suppose I've always been good at seeing things from a different perspective, she said, her voice soft but firm. I don't see the world as something that's always black and white. I see the possibility of change, the potential for growth, even in the darkest of times. Draco swallowed hard, her words resonating deep within him. He had spent so much of his life believing that everything had a clear-cut answer, that there was only one right way to do things. But Luna was showing him that it wasn't about finding the right answers. It was about creating the answers together, even when everything seemed uncertain. I wish I could see it that way, he said, his voice tinged with something that bordered on helplessness. You can, Luna replied, her gaze unwavering. You just have to choose to. Draco stared at her for a moment, feeling the truth of her words sink into his soul. She was right. He had always been bound by the constraints of his past, by the expectations of his family, his house, and the world that had shaped him. But Luna was showing him that there was another way. A better way. And maybe, just maybe, he could learn to follow that path. Thank you, Draco said softly, his heart lighter than it had been in days. Luna smiled, her eyes full of quiet affection. You don't need to thank me. You've always known the way forward. You just had to realize it for yourself. Before Draco could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed across the grounds, breaking the quiet of their conversation. He turned, instinctively moving to shield Luna from whatever or whoever was coming. It was Harry, Ron, and Hermione, their expressions serious and determined as they approached. The time for talk was over. The time for action had arrived. We're going, Harry said without preamble. The plan is set. We don't have much time. Draco stood, his heart pounding in his chest. It was happening. The moment he had been dreading, the moment he had been preparing for, was finally here. We've been working on the next step, Hermione added, her brow furrowed in concentration. There's a location we think the Dark Lord is targeting. We need to get there before he does. If we don't, we'll be too late. We'll need all the help we can get, Ron said, his voice grim but resolute. But we'll manage. We have to. Luna stepped forward, her gaze meeting Draco's. There was no fear in her eyes, only determination. Draco felt his own resolve solidify, a surge of adrenaline running through him. This was it. There was no turning back now. We'll be there, Draco said, his voice steady, betraying none of the unease he felt inside. Let's go. The group moved quickly, their steps echoing in the dark halls as they made their way to the room of requirement. Every corner, every shadow seemed to hold some unknown danger, and yet Draco couldn't help but feel that they were moving towards something even greater than the threat that awaited them. They were moving toward the chance to change everything. When they reached the room of requirement, they found the familiar faces of the Order already gathered. The room was buzzing with activity, preparations being made for the next step in their plan. Draco's heart pounded in his chest as he took his place among them, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him like a cloak. This is it, Harry said, his voice strong and commanding. The Dark Lord is going to make his move. We need to be ready. As Harry outlined the plan, Draco's mind raced. The stakes had never been higher. The fate of the wizarding world rested on their shoulders. But even in the face of such overwhelming odds, Draco found a flicker of hope. They were fighting together, Luna, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the rest of the Order. And that was something he hadn't had before. Together, they were unstoppable. The tension in the air was thick as the final details were ironed out, but Draco couldn't help but feel a spark of something new inside him. A spark of belief, of hope, of determination. They could do this. They had to. The battle was coming, and Draco would face it with Luna by his side. The night had fallen silent, almost unnervingly so. The world felt still, as if holding its breath in the moments before an inevitable storm. Hogwarts, usually filled with the buzz of students and the soft clatter of moving furniture, now stood eerily quiet. The walls, once full of laughter and debate, seemed to absorb the tension in the air, as though the castle itself understood the gravity of what was about to transpire. Draco, Luna, Harry, and the rest of the group stood in the room of requirement, their faces pale in the dim light, their hearts heavy with the burden of what they were about to undertake. Time was no longer their ally. They were about to take the fight directly to the Dark Lord's forces, and they couldn't afford to waste another moment. "Are we ready?" Harry's voice was sharp, commanding, but there was an undercurrent of unease in it. No one spoke for a moment, the weight of the question too heavy to answer. Draco turned to look at Luna, her silvery hair cascading down her back, her wide eyes filled with calm determination. In this moment, she seemed unshaken, her quiet presence a comfort in the face of the looming battle. He had learned something new about himself since they had joined forces, something he had never truly acknowledged before. Luna's steadfastness had begun to become his own, and with it, he no longer felt the crushing weight of uncertainty that had once dominated his thoughts. "We are," Draco replied, his voice steady, more certain than he felt. Luna's gentle smile was all he needed to solidify that resolve. With her beside him, he could face anything. As they stepped into the darkened hall of the room of requirement, the door behind them closed with a soft but resolute thud. The final step had been taken, and there was no going back now. A portal opened before them, its edges shimmering faintly with an eerie blue light. It was their path forward, their only way into the heart of the enemy's territory. The group stepped through the portal, and for a moment, it was as if the world shifted beneath their feet. They found themselves standing on the outskirts of an old, decrepit building, its towering silhouette a stark contrast against the moonlit sky. It was a place Draco had never seen, but he knew it well enough. This was where it would happen. The Dark Lord's forces had been gathering here for weeks, and they had to stop them before it was too late. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the others moved into position, their eyes scanning the surroundings, alert to every movement, every sound. But it was Draco who felt the weight of this place more than anyone else. It was as if the darkness itself was alive, stretching out around him like a tangible force. The air was thick with malevolent energy, and he could almost feel the Dark Lord's presence looming nearby. Draco swallowed hard, his hand instinctively reaching for his wand. Beside him, Luna remained calm, her eyes focused ahead, as if she could see things that others could not. She always had a way of looking at the world that seemed to reveal hidden truths, truths that even the most powerful wizards could not perceive. "They're close," Luna whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling of the night air. "Very close." Draco nodded, his grip tightening around his wand. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was no fear, only the cold, steely focus of a man who had come too far to turn back now. He had made his choices, and whatever happened next, he would stand by them. For Luna. For Hogwarts. For everything that was worth fighting for. The others had already taken their positions, preparing for whatever lay ahead. Harry and Hermione exchanged a quick glance, and without a word, they moved toward the entrance of the building, their wands raised. Draco and Luna followed closely behind, their steps careful and measured. As they entered the building, the air grew colder, the silence more oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, felt like a countdown. The further they went into the heart of the structure, the more they realized how deeply entrenched the Dark Lord's forces were here. The walls were covered in strange runes and symbols, dark magic hanging in the air like a suffocating fog. "Stay close," Harry whispered, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. They moved as one, a unified force against the darkness. Draco felt a strange sense of camaraderie growing among them. For all their differences, for all the obstacles that had once divided them, they were now bound together by a common purpose. The war was no longer just about right and wrong. It was about survival. It was about saving the world from a fate far worse than anything they had ever imagined. The path ahead seemed endless, winding deeper into the heart of the building. The further they went, the more they could feel the presence of the Dark Lord's followers, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. But it wasn't just the fear of his followers that gripped Draco. It was the knowledge that the final confrontation was fast approaching, that he was about to face the man who had haunted his family, who had taken so much from them, and who had threatened the lives of so many innocent people. They reached a large chamber at the center of the building, its stone walls covered in thick, black vines that seemed to pulse with dark magic. The room was bathed in an eerie red glow, the source of which seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. In the center of the room stood a massive altar, its surface carved with ancient symbols, a dark sigil at its center. The moment they stepped into the chamber, they were met with the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching, soft but deliberate. Draco's pulse quickened, and he instinctively moved to stand beside Luna. They were not alone anymore. And then, from the shadows, he saw them. Figures cloaked in black robes, their faces hidden beneath hoods. They moved like phantoms, silent and quick, surrounding them in a tightening circle. Draco's heart raced. This was it. The confrontation they had been preparing for. "You've come," a cold, venomous voice rang out, and Draco's blood ran cold. The Dark Lord himself emerged from the shadows, his pale, twisted face illuminated by the blood-red glow of the chamber. His eyes, slits of pure malice, fixed upon Draco. The Dark Lord's presence filled the room, suffocating, all-encompassing. Draco felt the weight of the gaze on him like a physical blow. "We've come to stop you," Draco said, his voice steady, but his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. The Dark Lord's lips curled into a cruel smile, his voice a hissing whisper. "You think you can stop me? You are all fools." The battle was about to begin. The room seemed to close in around them as the Dark Lord's chilling laugh echoed off the walls, filling every corner with a sense of dread. Draco's heart was hammering in his chest, but he forced himself to focus, to remind himself that this was the moment. There was no turning back now. Luna stood beside him, her presence a quiet force against the overwhelming darkness. Draco could feel her hand brush against his for just a moment, a silent reassurance. No matter what happened, they were in this together. And that gave him strength. "Draco, Luna," the Dark Lord sneered, his gaze flicking between the two of them, his voice thick with disdain. "How quaint. I expected you to be with your dear friends, Harry Potter and his band of misfits. But here you are, pretending to defy me." Draco felt a surge of anger, but he kept his voice steady. "We're not pretending. We're here to stop you, and we will." The Dark Lord's eyes flickered with amusement. "You think you can stop me? You, a mere child of my enemies, and this peculiar girl." He sneered at Luna, as if her presence was beneath him. "You've already failed before you even began." Luna's voice was soft, but it carried a calm conviction that seemed to ripple through the air. "Darkness cannot exist without light," she said, her words echoing in the tense silence. "And it is in light that we find our strength." Draco shot a glance at Luna, surprised by the power in her words. There was something almost prophetic about them, something that made his resolve even stronger. She had a way of seeing things that no one else did, of cutting through the thick fog of fear and uncertainty and finding the heart of the matter. The Dark Lord's smile twisted further into something far more sinister. "You've always been a fool, Draco. Just like your father." At the mention of his father, Draco's blood ran cold. He knew what the Dark Lord was trying to do, trying to bait him, to make him doubt. But Draco had been down that road before. He wasn't going to let the Dark Lord manipulate him again. "I am nothing like my father," Draco said through gritted teeth. "And you'll regret ever thinking you could control me." The tension in the room was palpable. The walls seemed to pulse with dark magic, and the very air around them crackled with the energy of the impending battle. Every nerve in Draco's body was on edge. This was it. This was the fight he had been preparing for his entire life. Harry, Hermione, and Ron moved into position, their wands raised, their faces set with determination. They had all been through so much, each of them scarred by their own battles, but now they stood united. This was their final stand. "Get ready," Harry whispered, his voice low but filled with the kind of certainty that only came from years of fighting alongside friends who became family. "This ends tonight." The Dark Lord's followers, the Death Eaters, circled around them, their wands raised, their faces masked in shadow. The odds were against them. The Death Eaters outnumbered them. But Draco wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Luna turned to him, her face calm but her eyes shining with a quiet fire. "We can do this," she said simply, her voice unwavering. "Together." Draco nodded, his hand tightening around his wand. The time for words was over. It was time to act. With a flick of his wrist, Draco cast the first spell, a brilliant flash of light that sent the closest Death Eater stumbling back. The fight was on. The room erupted into chaos. Wands flashed, curses flew through the air, and the sound of combat filled every corner of the chamber. Draco's mind was a blur as he deflected spell after spell, his movements instinctive, fueled by the adrenaline of the moment. He had trained for this. He had been preparing for this day, and now it was here. He saw Luna move with grace and precision, her spells weaving through the air with an otherworldly fluidity. She wasn't just fighting, she was dancing through the chaos, her movements effortless, almost as though she were part of the very air around them. Draco couldn't help but watch her for a moment, mesmerized by the way she fought. There was something otherworldly about her, something that seemed to bend reality itself. But there was no time for distractions. He shook his head, refocusing on the battle in front of him. A curse flew his way, and he barely had time to block it with a shielding charm. The blast sent him stumbling back, his heart pounding in his chest. He was surrounded. The Dark Lord's followers were closing in, their wands raised, their eyes full of malice. But then, just as quickly as the threat had come, Luna was there, her hand on his shoulder, her calm voice a beacon in the storm. "Don't worry," she whispered. "We're not alone." Draco turned to find Harry, Ron, and Hermione fighting alongside them, their backs pressed together, a wall of unwavering strength. Together, they fought like one cohesive force, moving in perfect synchronicity. There was no hesitation in their movements. No fear. The Dark Lord watched from a distance, his eyes burning with rage. He had underestimated them, thought them weak. But Draco could see the fear in his eyes now. He could see the cracks in the Dark Lord's confidence, the realization that this wasn't going according to plan. With one final, desperate scream, the Dark Lord raised his wand, his voice cutting through the din of battle. Enough! A wave of pure, black magic surged from his wand, sweeping across the room in a tidal wave of darkness. Draco felt the force of it push against him, felt the very air around him freeze as the power surged toward them. But just as it seemed that all hope would be lost, Luna stepped forward, her hand raised in a gesture of calm defiance. "Light," she said softly. The air around them shifted, the darkness receding as a brilliant, blinding light erupted from Luna's wand, a force of pure magic that cut through the Dark Lord's power like a knife through butter. The room seemed to crackle with energy, the darkness unraveling in the face of the light. The Dark Lord faltered, his eyes wide with shock, but before he could react, Harry was upon him, his wand raised high. "No more," Harry said, his voice a steady roar. "It ends here." With a final, powerful spell, the Dark Lord fell to the ground, his power dissipating into the air like smoke. The battle was over. For a long moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, one by one, the remaining Death Eaters fled, vanishing into the shadows from which they had come. Draco stood in the middle of the room, his body aching, his breath coming in heavy gasps. He had done it. They had done it. The Dark Lord was gone. Luna stepped up beside him, her hand reaching for his. He grasped it tightly, feeling the warmth of her touch seep into him, grounding him in the aftermath of the battle. They had won. But Draco knew that this was only the beginning. There was still work to be done, still a future to build. And with Luna by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. The battle was over. The war that had torn through their lives and the lives of so many others had finally reached its conclusion. The Dark Lord was gone, and his followers, the remnants of his twisted empire, had scattered into the shadows, broken and leaderless. It should have been a moment of triumph, but the air still felt heavy, as if the echoes of the past were refusing to be silenced. Draco stood amidst the wreckage, his hand still gripping Luna's, his mind racing. It was hard to grasp the enormity of what they had just accomplished. The world had changed in an instant, and yet everything still felt the same. Hogwarts had been saved, but what about the people who had been lost along the way? What about the families that had been torn apart, the scars that couldn't be healed by magic? Beside him, Luna was as calm as ever, her eyes distant but not sad. She seemed to be looking at something far beyond the ruins of the battle, something only she could see. Draco had come to understand that look in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had seen the world for what it truly was, flawed, broken, but still beautiful. "We did it," Draco said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's over." Luna nodded, her hand squeezing his gently. "Yes, it's over, but it's not the end. There is so much more to rebuild. Her words rang true. The war might have ended, but the work of healing, of restoring what had been lost, was just beginning. Draco knew that now more than ever. The world needed hope, needed to believe that life could go on after everything they had been through. "Do you think we can really rebuild everything?" Draco asked, looking out over the ruined landscape of Hogwarts. The once beautiful grounds were now marred by the scars of battle, burnt trees, shattered walls, and the remnants of spells that had left their mark on the very earth. Luna's eyes softened as she turned to him, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I think we can. It will take time, and there will be pain, but we can. We have to believe that, don't we?" Draco nodded slowly. He had never been one for idealism, never one to see the world through rose-colored glasses. But looking at Luna now, he felt something shift inside him. She believed it. She believed that they could heal, that they could fix what had been broken. And somehow that belief was contagious. "We'll do it together," Draco said, his voice more certain than he had ever heard it before. "We'll rebuild. Hogwarts, the wizarding world, everything. Together." Luna smiled, and for the first time in a long while, Draco saw a light in her eyes that wasn't just the reflection of hope. It was a light that came from deep within her. A light that had always been there, hidden under the surface, waiting for the right moment to shine. "Together," Luna agreed softly. As the others began to gather, their faces tired but resolute, Draco couldn't help but feel a sense of peace settle over him. The people he had once considered enemies, the people who had been his rivals, were now his allies. He saw Harry and Hermione standing side by side, their arms around each other, their faces filled with quiet relief. Ron was beside them, his broad shoulders slumped with exhaustion, but his expression softening in the aftermath of the fight. They had all been through so much, each of them scarred in their own way. And yet, here they were alive, standing together, united in their victory. Draco wasn't sure how to explain it, but in that moment, he felt a sense of belonging. It was as if he had finally found his place, not just within this group of people, but within the world itself. "Draco," Harry said, walking over to him with a tired but sincere smile. "I just wanted to say thank you. For everything." Draco raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Thank you? For what?" "For standing with us," Harry said, his voice genuine. "For fighting with us. I know it wasn't easy for you. But you did it. You helped save us all." Draco felt a strange lump form in his throat. He wasn't sure what to say. Part of him had expected Harry to still look at him with suspicion, with distrust. After all, Draco had been a part of the very thing they had all fought against for so long. But here was Harry, offering his gratitude, his respect. "It wasn't just me," Draco said, shaking his head. "We all did it. Together." Harry gave him a small but appreciative nod. "You're right. But that doesn't mean it isn't worth saying." Luna stepped forward, her hand still in Draco's, her presence a calming force as always. She gave Harry a gentle smile. "We're all different now. The past is behind us. What matters now is what we do with the future." Harry's smile softened as he looked at Luna. "You're right, of course. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. A lot to rebuild." "That's true," Hermione said, joining the conversation. "But we've come this far. We'll get through it. Together." The group stood there for a long while, just being together, finding comfort in the quiet aftermath of the storm. The war had left its scars, both on the world and within their hearts. But it had also shown them something valuable, the strength of their bonds, the power of their unity. Draco looked around at his friends, the people who had become his family in all the ways that mattered. He felt something stir within him, something that had been dormant for so long. The anger, the bitterness, the fear, it was all slipping away. And in its place, there was something new, hope. Hope for the future. Hope for the world they were going to rebuild. And hope that, no matter what came next, they would face it together. "Tomorrow is a new day," Luna said softly, as if reading his thoughts. Draco looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. "A new day," he echoed. And for the first time in his life, Draco Malfoy truly believed in the possibility of a brighter tomorrow. The morning after the final battle, the sun rose gently over the horizon, casting a soft golden light over the grounds of Hogwarts. The ruins of the castle still stood, scarred by the conflict, but there was an undeniable sense of peace in the air. The battle had ended, but the work of healing had only just begun. Draco stood by the lake, watching the ripples in the water as the breeze ruffled his hair. The world felt different now, calmer, but still uncertain. It was hard to believe that only hours ago, he had been fighting for his life. Now, with the Dark Lord gone, the world seemed both fragile and full of possibility. He wasn't sure how to reconcile those feelings, but for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. Luna joined him quietly, her presence as serene as the lake itself. She didn't speak immediately, just stood by his side, letting the moment unfold between them. Draco had come to appreciate the quiet way Luna existed in the world. She didn't rush. She didn't need to fill every silence. She just was. "I thought it would feel different," Draco said after a while, his voice distant. "The war's over, but I don't know what comes next." Luna turned to him, her eyes reflecting the quiet wisdom that she always carried with her. "It's natural to feel that way," she said gently. "The war was a part of who we were for so long. But the world is full of possibilities now. It's not about what comes next. It's about what we choose to make of it." Her words were simple, yet profound, and Draco found himself turning them over in his mind. He had spent so much of his life following paths laid out for him by his family, by the expectations of others. But now, for the first time, he realized that he was free. He could choose his own future. He could choose who he wanted to be. "It feels strange," he admitted. "I spent so long being told who I was supposed to be. Now that I don't have those expectations anymore, I don't know what to do with myself." Luna smiled softly, a faint glimmer of understanding in her gaze. "The future is a blank canvas, Draco. And you hold the brush." Draco looked at her, surprised by the clarity of her words. Luna had always seen the world in a way that others didn't. She had a gift for seeing possibilities where others saw only limitations. It was that vision, that unwavering belief in the potential for change, that had drawn him to her in the first place. "I'm not sure I know how to start," Draco confessed, feeling vulnerable in a way he never had before. "I've spent so long trying to be someone else, trying to live up to what my father expected. It's hard to know where to go from here." Luna took a step closer, her hand reaching out to touch his. "You don't have to have all the answers right away," she said softly. "Take it one step at a time. You don't have to change everything in an instant. It's okay to start small." Draco nodded, his heart heavy but hopeful. He had no illusions about the road ahead. It wouldn't be easy to shed the old layers of who he had been. He had grown up with so many expectations, so many preconceived notions about what his life should be. But now he had the chance to choose differently. And maybe that was enough. Together, they walked back toward the castle, their footsteps light on the soft earth. As they passed the wreckage of the battle, Draco couldn't help but think about the people they had lost, the friends, the families, the loved ones who would never return. The scars of the war would remain, both on the land and in their hearts. But that didn't mean they couldn't heal. The halls of Hogwarts were quiet now, the usual buzz of students and laughter absent. The castle had been a place of fear and uncertainty for so long, but now it was a sanctuary, a place of rest, of recovery. The war was over, but the rebuilding had just begun. "Do you think we can ever really go back to how things were?" Draco asked, his voice thoughtful. Luna paused, considering the question. "No," she said finally, her voice soft but resolute. "But that doesn't mean we can't build something new. Something better." Draco looked at her, struck by the wisdom in her words. He had always feared change, had always clung to the past as a way of protecting himself. But Luna was right. The past was gone. What mattered now was what they could create together. As they entered the Great Hall, they were greeted by the familiar sight of Harry, Hermione, and Ron, sitting at one of the tables, talking quietly. There was a sense of camaraderie among them, a bond forged through shared experiences and struggles. Draco had never felt like he truly belonged with them, but now, standing alongside Luna, he realized that he was part of this family too. "Hey," Harry said, looking up as they approached. "We were just talking about what comes next. What do you think?" Draco hesitated for a moment. He had no clear answers, no grand vision of what the future held. But as he looked at the people around him, people who had fought alongside him, who had stood by him when he needed them most, he felt a flicker of something. A spark of hope. "I think," he began, his voice steady, "that the future is ours to shape. And I'm ready to help build something better. With all of you. Luna smiled at him, her eyes full of quiet pride. Draco knew that, together, they could face whatever came next. The world was broken, yes, but it wasn't beyond repair. They had the power to rebuild, to forge a new path forward. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, there would be setbacks. But as long as they had each other, as long as they held on to the belief that things could get better, they would never lose hope. The war had ended, but the journey was just beginning. The days following the battle were quiet, almost unnervingly so. The shock of their victory had faded, leaving behind a heavy sense of both exhaustion and anticipation. For Draco, the days were spent in reflection, on what had come before and what lay ahead. Every corner of Hogwarts seemed to carry the weight of history. The echoes of the past, both the good and the bad, lingered in the walls, in the very air they breathed. He had always thought that victory would bring a sense of relief, but instead, it felt like a blank slate, an open expanse of uncertainty. What would he do with this new world? How could he make up for the things he had done, the choices he had made? Luna, as always, was the one to help him navigate those questions. She was a calming presence in a world that had suddenly been turned upside down. They spent their days walking the grounds together, often in silence, sometimes talking about trivial things, and other times discussing deeper thoughts. In her company, Draco found a sense of peace he hadn't known he needed. Luna had a way of making everything seem possible, of showing him that there was beauty in rebuilding, not just in the world around them, but in the hearts of the people who had been broken by the war. One afternoon, as they walked by the now-quiet Quidditch pitch, Draco glanced at Luna, his thoughts drifting back to something he had been wondering for a while. "Luna," he said, his voice hesitant, "how do you forgive yourself for all the things you've done?" Luna's gaze was soft as she turned to him. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, Draco. It's about accepting that we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do afterward, how we choose to move forward." Draco nodded slowly, her words settling deep within him. The weight of his past had always been a burden, one that had held him back from truly embracing the future. He had been defined by his family, by the choices they had made for him, but now, in the aftermath of everything, he was realizing that he didn't have to carry that burden forever. The road ahead was his to walk. I think I'm starting to understand," Draco said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's not about erasing the past. It's about choosing to be someone better from now on." Luna smiled at him, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "Exactly. And you're already on that path, Draco. It's not about perfection. It's about progress." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. It was Ron, looking slightly out of breath but smiling nonetheless. "Hey, you two," he said, his usual grin on his face. "I was just looking for you. We're having a bit of a gathering in the common room later. Just a small thing. Some of us thought it'd be nice to get together and talk about what we're going to do next." Draco raised an eyebrow, surprised. He had been expecting everyone to retreat into their own corners, to quietly lick their wounds and mourn the losses they had endured. The idea of coming together for something other than a war council was unusual, but not unwelcome. "You sure you want me there?" Draco asked, half teasing but also half worried about how his presence might be received. Ron rolled his eyes, clearly unfazed. "Of course. We're all in this together, right? Doesn't matter what side we were on before. What matters is what we're doing now." Luna gave Draco's hand a reassuring squeeze, and for the first time in days, he felt a sense of relief. It had been so easy to focus on the past, to dwell on the mistakes and the choices that had led him to this point. But the future was full of new possibilities, and he could either hide from them or step forward into the unknown with the people who had stood by him through the darkest of times. "I'll be there," Draco said, his voice steady, the weight of uncertainty lifting just a little. It's time to rebuild, after all. As they made their way to the common room, the atmosphere was different than Draco expected. There was no tension, no cold silence. Instead, there was a quiet sense of camaraderie among the group. It was a small gathering, just a few of them, including Harry, Hermione, Ron, and even Ginny, who had been sitting quietly with a cup of tea in her hand. The mood was subdued, but there was an unspoken understanding between them all. "Glad you could make it, Draco," Harry said, offering him a nod as he sat down beside Hermione. There was no lingering distrust in his eyes, no judgment. It was a simple acknowledgement of what had come before and what was to come next. Draco sat down next to Luna, who smiled at him gently before turning her attention to the group. "We were just talking about what we want to do now that the war is over," Hermione said, her voice calm but determined. "We've all been through a lot, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us. The wizarding world is broken, and it's going to take all of us to rebuild it." Ron nodded, his usual bravado softened by the weight of the conversation. "We're not just talking about fixing Hogwarts or getting the ministry back in order. We're talking about rebuilding trust. There are a lot of people out there who won't just forgive and forget. We're going to have to show them that things can be different." Draco looked around at the group, at the faces of people he had once considered enemies, and yet now, there was an understanding between them that transcended their pasts. They were all here, together, in this moment, trying to move forward. They had all made mistakes, all had things they regretted, but now they had the chance to make things right. "I think we all have something to offer," Draco said slowly, his voice steady. "We've all been shaped by this war. We know what it's like to lose, to fight for something we believe in. Now, we need to use that knowledge to help those who are still struggling." Luna's hand slipped into his, her touch grounding him as he spoke. She didn't need to say anything, just being with him, quietly supportive, was enough. "We're going to have to be patient," Harry added, his voice low. "It won't be easy. There will be resistance, there will be setbacks. But we can do this. Together." Draco looked at the faces around the table, his heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and determination. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of it. The road ahead was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure. He didn't have to walk it alone. The rebuilding had begun. The weeks that followed were filled with an overwhelming sense of change. The wizarding world was still reeling from the aftermath of the war, but a collective effort to rebuild had begun in earnest. It wasn't an easy process. The scars left by the war were not just physical, but emotional, deep, raw wounds that would take time to heal. Draco found himself often at the forefront of this rebuilding process. Though he had once stood on the opposite side of the battle, he was now working alongside people who had once been his enemies. It was strange, but not unwelcome. The idea of redemption, of repairing the damage that had been done, had always felt distant. But now, in the midst of the work that lay before them, it seemed possible. Luna, ever the steady presence by his side, continued to be his anchor. She was a constant reminder that the world could be a better place, that even after all the destruction, there was still beauty to be found in the smallest moments. They spent hours working together, helping rebuild the Hogwarts grounds, offering assistance to those in need, and even visiting the families of those who had been lost. One afternoon, Draco stood outside the rebuilt walls of the burrow, watching as Ron and Ginny moved carefully through the charred remnants of the house. It had been destroyed during the battle, but now, with the help of magic and a lot of hard work, it was being restored. The Weasley family was putting everything back together, literally and figuratively. "You've come a long way, Draco," Luna said softly, standing next to him. Her voice was always calm, but there was something in her tone that made his heart ache. She saw so much in him, more than he sometimes saw in himself. Draco glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "I never imagined it would be like this," he admitted. "I thought I'd be running away from everything for the rest of my life. But here I am, rebuilding a house, trying to fix things with people who used to hate me." Luna smiled, her eyes gentle. "Rebuilding is never easy, but it's worth it, and you're not alone in it. You've found your place here, Draco." It was the first time he had truly believed it. For so long, he had felt like an outsider, like there was no place for him in this world of newfound peace. But now, in the midst of all the effort to rebuild, he realized that he did have a place. He had earned it through his actions, through the choices he had made. He had proven to himself and to others that he was capable of change. As they walked toward the burrow, Draco noticed that the Weasley family was laughing. Despite the hardships they had faced, there was a warmth between them that was undeniable. It was a stark contrast to the coldness that had once existed in his own family. "How did they do it?" Draco asked quietly, watching the Weasleys from a distance. "How did they stay so connected, even after everything?" Luna paused beside him, considering the question. "Love," she said simply. They never stopped loving each other, no matter what happened. They found strength in each other, in the bonds they shared. That's something we all need to remember. Draco absorbed her words, feeling the weight of them settle in his chest. He had spent so much of his life thinking that strength came from power, from control. But now he was beginning to understand that true strength came from connection, from the ability to lean on others, to love and be loved in return. As they reached the Weasleys, Ron and Ginny waved them over, their faces filled with the kind of warmth Draco hadn't experienced in years. The group of them, despite all their differences, had found a way to heal together. They had learned to forgive each other and themselves. "Draco," Ron called, his voice light but filled with an openness that was new. "We're making some progress here. The house will be back to its old self in no time, thanks to you." Draco gave a small smile, feeling a bit of pride at the acknowledgement. "It's the least I could do." Ginny, who had been standing next to Ron, turned to him with a smile. "It's more than that. You've done a lot for us. All of us." It was those words that struck Draco the most. He had expected to always be the outsider, the one who had to prove himself. But here, surrounded by people who had once been on the opposite side, he felt something that was unfamiliar, a sense of belonging. "You've earned your place here," Ginny continued, her tone warm. "We all have." The simplicity of her words and the sincerity in her eyes left Draco momentarily speechless. For so long, he had fought against the idea of forgiveness. He had believed that his actions were unforgivable, that he would always be defined by his past. But now, he was beginning to see that redemption wasn't a distant dream. It was something real, something that could happen if he truly committed to it. The afternoon passed in a blur of work and conversation. They cleared debris, fixed walls, and worked together in a way that felt natural. There was no tension, no animosity, just a shared purpose to make the world whole again, piece by piece. By the time the sun began to set, the burrow looked as it had before, restored and full of life. As they gathered around a small bonfire in the yard, Draco found himself sitting next to Luna, surrounded by the warmth of friends, old and new. The flames flickered brightly, casting long shadows in the gathering twilight. He realized then that the healing wasn't just about rebuilding physical structures. It was about rebuilding the trust between them all, learning to see one another not as enemies, but as fellow survivors of a war that had torn everything apart. "We've come a long way," Draco said quietly, looking at the fire. Luna squeezed his hand gently. "And there's still more to do. But we'll do it together." For the first time in his life, Draco felt at peace with the future. He had found his place, not just within the walls of Hogwarts or among the people who had once been his enemies, but within himself. He knew that there would be more challenges ahead, that the wounds of the past wouldn't disappear overnight. But he also knew that he was no longer running from them. As the fire crackled and the night grew deeper, Draco felt a sense of hope swell in his chest. He had found something more important than victory or power. He had found forgiveness. And with it, the possibility of a future worth fighting for. The world was beginning to settle, but it was still fragile. The scars of the past were not easily erased, yet the wizarding world had learned to adapt in a way that Draco had never thought possible. The efforts to rebuild were ongoing, but they had also given rise to something deeper, a shift in the hearts of the people. Draco had never imagined that he would feel like this, like he was truly a part of something greater. He had always felt like an outsider, like his family's legacy would always define him. But as he walked through the halls of Hogwarts with Luna by his side, he found that his past no longer had the same hold over him. The whispers of his family's reputation, the weight of his choices, no longer carried the same venom. He had worked hard to change, to prove that he could be someone different, and slowly, others were starting to see it. It was an ongoing process, and there were still those who looked at him with suspicion or doubt. But Draco was no longer bothered by their opinions. He had found a sense of peace within himself, and that was all that mattered. One afternoon, as he sat in the Hogwarts library, his mind wandering between the pages of a book he wasn't really reading, Luna joined him. She sat down across from him, her bright eyes always seeming to see more than anyone else. There was something comforting about her presence, a quiet understanding that seemed to wrap around him like a protective blanket. "You're deep in thought," she observed softly, her gaze gentle. Draco looked up, his expression thoughtful. I was just wondering what comes next. We've been through so much, and I know we're rebuilding, but what happens when it's all done? What's left? Luna smiled, the corners of her lips curling up in that characteristic way of hers. What's left, Draco, is the opportunity to create something new. You're not just rebuilding the world around you. You're rebuilding yourself. And that's a lifelong process. His gaze softened as he listened to her words. I never thought about it that way. It feels like we're always looking to the future, to fixing everything that's broken, but I never considered that we'd have to rebuild ourselves too. Of course, Luna said, her voice warm. The world is a reflection of us. If we want to create a world of peace, we have to start by creating peace within ourselves. That's where everything begins. Draco leaned back in his chair, considering her words. He had been so focused on making up for his past mistakes, trying to prove that he wasn't who people thought he was, that he hadn't considered the idea of simply being at peace with himself. He had worked so hard to fix the world around him, but perhaps the hardest work was the one he had yet to do, learning to forgive himself. Luna, Draco said, breaking the silence. How do you do it? How do you stay so calm, so sure of everything? Luna's eyes met his, and for a moment, there was a depth to her gaze that made Draco feel like she understood him in a way no one else could. Because I've learned that the world isn't as chaotic as it seems. People are chaotic, but the world itself? It's a beautiful, peaceful place if we let it be. We just need to stop fighting it, stop fighting ourselves. Draco absorbed her words, feeling something shift within him. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but rather a quiet realization that had been building over time. He had always been at war with himself, torn between the person he was supposed to be and the person he wanted to be. But now, as he sat in the library with Luna, surrounded by the familiar quiet of Hogwarts, he felt like he was finally starting to understand. Do you think I'll ever truly fit in? Draco asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Luna smiled gently, her eyes filled with kindness. You already do. You just have to believe it. As the words hung in the air, Draco felt a shift inside him. For so long, he had been looking for validation from the outside world, trying to prove himself worthy of acceptance. But now he realized that the only validation that truly mattered was the one he gave himself. The next few weeks passed in a blur of continued efforts to rebuild the wizarding world. Draco, Luna, and their friends continued to work together, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They helped families whose homes had been destroyed, aided the ministry in its reconstruction efforts, and offered their support to those still healing from the emotional toll of the war. It wasn't easy, but there was a sense of unity in the work that made it all feel worthwhile. One afternoon, as Draco and Luna walked along the edge of the forbidden forest, their hands brushing occasionally, Draco turned to her with a smile. Do you ever think about the future? About what it will look like when everything is finally fixed? Luna nodded, her expression thoughtful. I do, but I think the future is a collection of moments. And if we're living those moments with love and purpose, then we're already creating the future we want. Draco nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. For so long, he had been obsessed with the idea of fixing everything all at once, of making up for every mistake he had ever made. But now, he understood that healing was a process. It took time, it took effort, but it was also about finding joy in the present, in the small moments of connection and understanding. As they walked back to the castle, Draco felt a renewed sense of purpose. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't need to. What mattered was that he was on the right path, surrounded by people who cared for him and who believed in him. He wasn't defined by his past. He was defining his future. And as long as Luna was by his side, he knew that he could face anything. The sky was a brilliant shade of purple as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft glow over the grounds of Hogwarts. The warmth of the day had given way to the cool, crisp evening air, and with it, the quiet hum of life seemed to settle in. It was a time of peace, but also one of uncertainty. The aftermath of the war had left many wondering what the future would hold, and for Draco, there was still much he needed to figure out. He stood on the balcony of the astronomy tower, looking out at the vast expanse of the castle grounds, his mind a tangle of thoughts. The rebuilding efforts were progressing well, and he had found a place within the new world. one where he could finally live without the weight of his family's past dragging him down. But despite all of this, he felt a subtle tension within him, as though something was missing. Luna appeared beside him, her presence always bringing a sense of calm. She didn't say anything at first, simply leaning against the stone railing, looking out at the same view. Draco appreciated her quiet company. Sometimes, words weren't needed between them. It was the unspoken understanding that mattered most. After a few moments, Draco broke the silence, his voice softer than usual. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, Luna. I've spent so much time trying to fix things, trying to prove myself. But now I don't know what's next. What am I supposed to do when there's nothing left to fix? Luna turned her head to look at him, her expression gentle and knowing. That's the hardest part, Draco. We often get caught up in the idea that we have to fix everything, that we have to keep moving forward without ever stopping to consider what we really want. But maybe that's what we need to focus on now, what we want. Draco frowned slightly. What I want, he repeated, as if the concept was foreign to him. I've never really thought about that. I've always been driven by what I thought I was supposed to do, by what was expected of me. But I don't know what I want anymore. Luna smiled softly, her eyes distant for a moment, as if she were seeing something only she could. That's okay. You don't have to know everything right now. The world is full of possibilities, Draco. All you have to do is follow what feels right, what brings you peace. You've been so focused on the future and on fixing the past that you've forgotten to live in the present. Draco considered her words, the weight of them sinking in. It was true, he had been so caught up in the aftermath of everything, so focused on undoing the damage he had caused, that he hadn't taken the time to figure out who he was without all the chaos. Luna was right. He had been so intent on fixing things that he had never asked himself what he truly wanted. I don't even know where to start, Draco admitted, feeling a sense of vulnerability that he wasn't used to showing. I've spent my whole life being told what to do, what was expected of me. I've never had the chance to just choose. Luna's smile widened, a spark of understanding in her eyes. Then maybe it's time you start choosing. Start small. What do you want right now? What would make you happy? The simplicity of her question struck Draco deeply. He had spent so much time focused on his obligations, on fixing everything that was broken, that he had forgotten the importance of finding happiness for himself. Maybe he didn't have to know what the rest of his life would look like. Maybe he just needed to take one step at a time, focusing on the present moment. I guess. I want to keep doing this, Draco said after a long pause, gesturing to the castle and the grounds below. I want to keep helping rebuild, to keep making things right. And I want to be here with you. Luna's gaze softened, and her voice was filled with quiet warmth. You're already doing more than enough, Draco. You've already proven that you can change. You've already proven that you're willing to put in the work. And as for being here with me, I want that too. Draco's heart fluttered at her words, a warmth spreading through him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. He didn't have to have all the answers, didn't have to know what his future held. He just needed to follow the path that felt right. As the night sky deepened and the stars began to twinkle above them, Draco realized that his journey wasn't about fixing everything at once or living up to some ideal. It was about embracing the present, about accepting that there was still more to learn and more to experience. He was no longer the same person he had been, and that in itself was enough. He turned to Luna, a gentle smile on his lips. Thank you, he said quietly, for always being there, for showing me that it's okay to just be. Luna's eyes shone with a quiet understanding, her hand reaching out to gently squeeze his. You're not alone, Draco. You never have been. In that moment, with Luna by his side and the world stretched out before him, Draco felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, he didn't feel afraid. He knew that whatever came next, he would face it with the strength he had found within himself, and with Luna beside him. The journey ahead was unwritten, but it was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. The weeks following the peaceful evening on the astronomy tower passed in a comfortable rhythm. Draco felt like he was finally settling into a life that wasn't defined by his past, a life that was his to shape however he chose. He continued to assist in the rebuilding efforts, playing his part in restoring Hogwarts and the wizarding world, But there was a shift in him, an internal one. He was no longer driven by guilt, by a need to fix the wrongs of his past. Instead, he was learning to live for the present, to find joy in the small things that made up each day. Luna, as always, was by his side, offering her unique perspective on the world. It wasn't just her words that had a calming effect on him. It was her very presence. Her ability to see beauty in the most unlikely places had a way of grounding him, of reminding him that there was more to life than the weight of expectation or the shadow of old mistakes. One afternoon, Draco and Luna found themselves walking through the corridors of Hogwarts, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the silence of the nearly empty hall. The school year was winding down, and with it, the students who had remained to help with the restoration were preparing to leave. It felt like the last remnants of the war were finally being put to rest, and yet, Draco couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something unresolved. Luna glanced over at him, sensing the shift in his mood. "You're quiet today," she said softly, her eyes filled with concern. "Is something on your mind?" Draco hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put his feelings into words. "I guess I'm just thinking about the future," he said, his voice low. "I know I've made progress, but there's this part of me that still feels uncertain. What happens when all of this is over? When the rebuilding is done, when there's nothing left to fix? What comes next for me?" Luna walked beside him, her pace slow and steady. "What comes next is whatever you choose. You've spent so much of your life trying to fix things, trying to make up for your mistakes. But now it's time to decide who you want to be, not based on what you were, but on who you are now." Draco stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her. "But what if I don't know who I am? What if I'm just lost?" Luna reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was warm and reassuring. "You're not lost, Draco. You're just discovering who you are, and that's okay. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to keep moving forward, one step at a time." Draco nodded, feeling a sense of comfort in her words. He wasn't used to hearing such simple truths, but somehow, in Luna's presence, they felt like the most profound things he had ever heard. The pressure to have everything figured out had been one of the heaviest burdens he had carried for years. But maybe Luna was right. Maybe the key wasn't in having all the answers, but in simply living, in finding joy in the journey rather than the destination. "I don't know what I want, Luna," Draco admitted quietly. "But I think I'm starting to realize that I don't need to know right now. Maybe it's enough to just be here, to just exist." Luna smiled, her eyes sparkling with understanding. "Exactly. You don't have to have everything figured out all at once. It's the small moments, the ones we don't always expect, that make the biggest difference." They continued walking together, side by side, the weight of their conversation lifting with each step. It was clear that Draco was still processing everything, still figuring out his place in the world. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of the uncertainty. He didn't have to have everything figured out. He just had to keep moving forward, one step at a time, with Luna by his side. As the days passed, Draco continued to find solace in the small moments. He found joy in helping the younger students rediscover their love for learning, in taking part in quiet conversations with friends, in the gentle rhythm of life as it slowly began to heal. And with Luna's gentle guidance, he learned that it was okay to let go of the past, to forgive himself, and to embrace the future, whatever it might hold. One evening, as they sat together on the steps leading down to the Black Lake, watching the sun set over the shimmering water, Draco found himself at peace. The chaos of the past seemed like a distant memory, and in its place was a quiet sense of belonging. "I never imagined this," Draco said softly, his voice filled with wonder. "That I could feel at peace, that I could be here, in this moment, and not feel like I'm drowning in regret." Luna turned to him, her expression serene. "You've come a long way, Draco. The hardest part is always the beginning, but you've made it through. And now, you're free to be who you are." Draco smiled, a weight lifting from his chest. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. He had found his place in the world, and it wasn't defined by his past mistakes or the expectations of others. It was his own, and that was enough. "Thank you, Luna," he whispered, his heart full. "For everything." Luna smiled back at him, her eyes filled with warmth. "You don't need to thank me, Draco. You've done the hard work. All I did was help you see it." They sat in comfortable silence as the last rays of the sun disappeared below the horizon, content in the knowledge that they had both come so far, and that the journey was far from over. But whatever came next, Draco knew one thing for certain: he wasn't alone. The crispness of autumn had settled over Hogwarts like a blanket, the air cool and filled with the scent of fallen leaves. The trees in the Forbidden Forest had begun their transformation, their leaves turning vibrant shades of red and gold. It was a time of change, and Draco couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation. For the first time since the war, he felt like he was standing at the threshold of something new, something exciting, yet unknown. His days were no longer consumed by the remnants of the past. He had made his peace with the mistakes he had once made, with the choices that had haunted him for so long. Now, it was time to look forward, to embrace the future rather than retreat from it. But still, that lingering sense of uncertainty remained. Luna had been a steady presence, guiding him through each step, helping him see the world in a way he never had before. She had taught him that the future didn't have to be something to fear. It could be something to look forward to, something to shape and mold with his own hands. One evening, as they sat in the small garden behind the castle, Draco found himself reflecting on everything that had happened since the war. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer felt like burdens to carry. In fact, they had become part of who he was, part of his journey. "You've changed, Draco," Luna said softly, breaking the silence. She was sitting beside him on the stone bench, her eyes watching the fireflies flicker in the dusk. "I can see it in the way you carry yourself now. There's a lightness to you that wasn't there before." Draco glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "I don't feel so weighed down anymore," he admitted, the words coming out more easily than he expected. "I used to think that I could never escape my past, that I'd always be defined by the mistakes I made. But I don't think that's true anymore." Luna smiled, her gaze softening. "Of course it's not true. Your past is a part of you, but it doesn't have to define you. You've learned from it, and that's what matters." Draco nodded, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. He had spent so much of his life trying to outrun his past, but now he understood that it was something he could embrace, something he could learn from. The key was to keep moving forward. "Do you ever wonder what the future holds?" Draco asked, his voice filled with quiet curiosity. "I mean, now that the war is over, now that things are different, what comes next? What do we do with all the possibilities?" Luna looked up at the starry sky, her eyes thoughtful. "I think the future is something we create with each choice we make," she said, her voice light but full of conviction. "It's not some far-off thing that just happens to us. It's shaped by what we do now in this moment. We just have to trust that, whatever happens, we'll be able to handle it." Draco let her words sink in. She was right, of course. The future wasn't something that happened to them. It was something they could create, something they could shape with their decisions, with their actions. There was a certain freedom in that, a freedom he hadn't felt in years. I think I'm ready," he said finally, his voice steady. "Ready to stop hiding from what's coming. Ready to face the future, whatever it may bring." Luna turned to him, her eyes warm and full of understanding. "I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think you're ready to be the person you were always meant to be." Draco smiled, feeling the weight of her words settle into his heart. There had been so many times when he had doubted himself, when he had questioned whether he could ever truly change. But now, with Luna beside him, he felt a sense of certainty that he had never known before. He didn't have to have all the answers, didn't have to know exactly what the future would look like. He just had to keep moving forward, trusting in the path that lay ahead. As the night deepened and the stars shimmered above them, Draco felt a sense of peace. The future was still unknown, still a mystery, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of it. He had Luna by his side, and together, they would face whatever came next. "We don't have to have everything figured out," he said softly, more to himself than to Luna. "But as long as we're together, I think we'll be okay." Luna smiled, her hand gently brushing against his. "Yes, I think we will be." The next morning, Draco woke with a sense of clarity that he had never experienced before. It wasn't some grand revelation, but rather a quiet knowing that everything he needed was already within him. The future was no longer something to fear, it was something to embrace. With Luna at his side, Draco was ready to face whatever came next. The war was behind them, and the past was no longer a shadow hanging over him. The journey ahead was unknown, but for the first time, he didn't need to have all the answers. He just needed to keep walking, one step at a time. And as the sun rose over the horizon, Draco knew that the future, whatever it may hold, was full of possibility. The arrival of spring brought with it a sense of renewal, a tangible shift in the air as the last remnants of winter slowly melted away. The days grew longer, the sun warmer, and with it, the final days of Draco's last year at Hogwarts were quickly approaching. It felt surreal to him, as if he had lived through multiple lifetimes in the span of just a few years. The boy who had once walked the halls of Hogwarts with an air of arrogance and entitlement was now someone entirely different, a person who had shed the skin of his former self, emerging into something new. For the first time in his life, Draco was truly free. Free from the weight of his family's legacy, free from the expectations that had been placed on him, and free from the guilt that had once haunted his every step. He had made amends, rebuilt relationships that had seemed broken beyond repair, and now, as the school year drew to a close, he realized that the future ahead of him was his to shape. Luna, ever the steady presence by his side, had been a constant source of support. Their relationship had deepened over the past few months, evolving into something that neither of them could have predicted. What had started as an unlikely connection between two people from different worlds had grown into a bond that transcended all the labels they had once carried. Draco had never believed in the idea of soulmates before, but now, he couldn't imagine a future without Luna in it. She had shown him that there was more to life than just surviving. It was about living, truly living, and embracing the beauty of the world around them. As the final exams came to an end, Draco found himself standing on the edge of something new, something unknown, but filled with potential. The idea of leaving Hogwarts was bittersweet. This place had been both a prison and a sanctuary for him, a place where he had both suffered and grown. But now it was time to move on. Time to step into the world beyond the castle walls and face whatever awaited him there. On the night before their graduation, as the rest of the students celebrated in the Great Hall, Draco and Luna found themselves outside, walking along the banks of the Black Lake. The moon was high in the sky, casting a silver glow across the water, and the sound of crickets chirping filled the air. It was a moment of quiet reflection, the calm before the storm of the real world. Luna glanced over at Draco, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what the world will be like once we leave here?" Draco smiled softly, his gaze focused on the shimmering water. "All the time. It's hard to imagine a world without the walls of this castle, without the structure of school. But I suppose that's what makes it exciting, right? The unknown." Luna nodded, her gaze far away. "The world is full of possibilities, Draco. There's so much out there waiting for us. We just have to be brave enough to take the first step." Her words resonated deeply within him. It was true. There were endless possibilities ahead of them, but they could only be realized if they dared to face them. The future wasn't something to fear, it was something to embrace. "You're right," Draco said, his voice filled with newfound certainty. "The future is ours to shape. I think I'm ready to face it now." Luna turned to him, her eyes sparkling with warmth. "I know you are. You've come so far, Draco. And no matter what happens, I'll be here by your side." Draco reached out, taking her hand in his. "I'm not sure what the next chapter holds, but I know one thing for sure. I don't want to face it without you." Luna smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "You won't have to." They stood there for a while longer, simply enjoying the peace of the moment, the quiet certainty that the future, though unknown, would be full of promise. The world was vast and unpredictable, but for the first time, Draco didn't feel overwhelmed by it. He felt ready to face it, ready to take on whatever came next with Luna by his side. The next day, the graduation ceremony was everything Draco had expected, filled with speeches, handshakes, and the kind of fanfare that marked the end of an era. As he walked across the stage to accept his diploma, he couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. He had made it. He had survived the war, survived his own inner turmoil, and had come out on the other side stronger and more certain of who he was. Luna stood beside him at the ceremony, her presence as grounding as ever. She was a constant reminder of how far he had come, how much he had changed. And as they stood there, surrounded by friends and classmates, Draco realized something important. He was no longer defined by his past. He was no longer the boy who had been born into a world of privilege and expectation. He was Draco Malfoy, a young man with a future full of possibilities. After the ceremony, as the students gathered outside to say their goodbyes, Draco and Luna found a quiet spot away from the crowd. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the castle grounds. "So, what now?" Draco asked, his tone light but filled with genuine curiosity. Luna smiled, her eyes soft and thoughtful. "Now we create our own path. The world is out there, waiting for us. And we don't have to have all the answers right away. We just have to start." Draco looked out at the horizon, feeling a sense of excitement stir within him. The future was wide open, and for the first time, he wasn't afraid to step into it. With Luna by his side, he knew that whatever the world had in store, they would face it together. And that was all he needed to know. The day had arrived. The final day at Hogwarts was one of bittersweet farewell, not only to the school that had been home for so many years, but to the final remnants of childhood and the beginning of something entirely new. Draco stood on the steps of Hogwarts, gazing out at the sprawling grounds that had once seemed like a world of limitations. Today, however, everything felt different. The castle no longer felt like a place of restriction. It felt like a place of transformation, of learning, of growing. And most importantly, it felt like home. Behind him, the castle stood majestic, a symbol of everything he had overcome, both externally and within himself. His footsteps on the steps seemed almost symbolic, marking the end of one journey and the start of another. A journey into the world beyond, into the unknown, where he and Luna would create their own future. Luna, standing beside him, turned her gaze to him, her face soft with a gentle smile. She had always had that quiet way of looking at things, as if seeing beyond what was in front of her. Her smile said everything he needed to hear. They had come so far together. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. But in her words was an entire universe of meaning. Were they ready to leave behind everything they had known? Ready to create something from the ground up? Ready to face the vast, unknown world outside the castle walls? Draco didn't even need to think about it. He had known this moment was coming, and he had been preparing for it in ways he hadn't even realized. Everything he had learned here, everything he had gained, both from the lessons of his past and the love and understanding that Luna had given him, had prepared him for this moment. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady and certain. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." Luna's smile widened, and she nodded, taking his hand as they both looked ahead. Together, they walked down the steps, toward the future that awaited them. The path ahead was unmarked, a blank canvas waiting to be painted with their choices, their experiences, and their dreams. They didn't have a plan, not in the traditional sense. They didn't need one. They had each other, and that was all they truly needed. As they walked, they passed familiar faces, friends and fellow students, some of whom Draco had never imagined he'd grow close to. They had all been part of his journey, part of the transformation he had undergone. And now, as they parted ways, there was no bitterness, no regret. Only the knowledge that their time at Hogwarts had been a crucial chapter in their lives. It had shaped them, but it did not define them. They were moving beyond it. The world outside Hogwarts was vast. It stretched out before them, full of possibility, uncertainty, and adventure. There were no more dark marks hanging over their heads. There were no more looming threats of war or conflict. Instead, the horizon was a blank slate, waiting for them to write their own story. Draco thought about the things he had once feared, the future, the unknown, the life he was supposed to live. But now, those fears no longer seemed so daunting. He had found his way, not just through the dark, but into the light. And Luna, with her unwavering belief in him, had been the light in his life, showing him that there was more to living than just surviving. "You know," Draco said, breaking the silence between them as they walked along the edge of the lake. "When I was younger, I used to think I knew exactly what my life would look like. I thought I had everything planned out, that I had to follow a certain path. But now, I don't know what the future holds. And I'm okay with that." Luna squeezed his hand, her voice calm. "The future isn't something you can control, Draco. But that doesn't mean it's not worth living. We don't need to have all the answers, we just need to have the courage to take the next step. And we have that courage together. Draco smiled, his heart light. Together, he repeated softly. For the first time, it wasn't about being the best or being right or living up to expectations. It was about living authentically, living with purpose, and living for the present. The journey ahead was theirs to shape, and they would do it on their terms. As they approached the gates of Hogwarts, Draco felt a pang of nostalgia, a brief, fleeting moment of sadness for the place that had been his home for so long. But it quickly faded, replaced by excitement, hope, and anticipation. The world outside was waiting, and he was ready to meet it. I think we've come a long way, haven't we? Draco said, his voice a mixture of reflection and excitement. We have, Luna agreed. But the journey doesn't end here. This is just the beginning. With that, they stepped through the gates of Hogwarts, leaving the school behind as they entered the world beyond. The future was waiting, full of promise, and Draco knew that as long as they faced it together, there was nothing they couldn't do. The world was wide open, and their story was just beginning.